All right, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the November 21st pre-Turkey Day council meeting. And Judy, let's go ahead and call the meeting to order with the roll.
Hausch.
I'm here.
Stokes.
Here.
McQueen. Here. Also present is Village Manager Josue Salmarone. Staff members, Public Works Director Johnny Burns, Chief of Police Paige Burge, Finance Director Amy Kemper, and Village Solicitor Amy Blankenship. We are expecting Carmen Brown and Gavin DeMore Leonard any moment.
All right. Yeah, so we're starting a little bit early tonight because we're gonna try to tie some loose ends on the agenda, or I'm sorry, on the budget, in anticipation of our 2 budget meetings that we're gonna have in December. And I guess I want to begin by sort of framing, I think what we're trying to do in this hour is send some clear signals to our village team members about what we want to see in that final draft budget. So I think we've got a variety of items to focus on, and then, yeah, what we're hoping then is on December 5th that we'll have a budget that, reflects those things. We've got 2 more meetings to talk about the budget, and yeah, it's been one of those things that, we've got to really think carefully about how we're approaching things as cost of living gets more expensive and as our general fund gets a little bit tighter. And, I think I'll just lead off with one of the first things I wanted to mention is that in terms of general fund, we are getting to the point where we've been intentional about investing our excess general fund monies in capital improvements and whatnot, but there's a limit to how far we can spend down those reserves. We're still in good shape. We're going to continue to follow the state recommendation of having a 90-day reserve, but we're at the point where we don't have the ability to continue to do whatever we want. And so I think that's going to reflect some of the discussion that we're going to have in this next hour and over the next couple meetings. So I had a few things that I thought we should talk about that I think should be in the budget. And then I know Josue will have some things to add as well. So the next thing that I had was thinking about revenue opportunities. And so there are sort of 2 things on my mind, and I think this is where council needs to weigh in. One of those is we've been talking about the reciprocal income tax, and my understanding is that that is something that council has expressed in our budget meetings that we want to seriously entertain, and the plan is that we're going to talk about this at the next joint meeting, which we'll announce when we get to announcements. But I guess I wanted to make sure we're on the same page that that is something that we are planning to explore. So, okay. So the second thing that was on my list is paid parking. And I guess I've been talking about this for several years now. And I think there's been a lot of reticence around approaching that. My understanding is 2 of our council members that are not here are open to exploring this. And it is something that was in the budget or potentially in the budget to look at what that paid parking app, would cost. I think it was in the neighborhood of what, 70,000 or something like that.
That could be the cost, but it's the model is intended to support itself through fees.
Sure. And I guess, I've thrown out there, I think it could generate at least 200,000 a year or whatever. And so that was another thing I wanted to see if there is interest from council in seeing that in the budget.
Yes, I'm interested in that for sure.
Okay, Mary Ann?
Well, 70,000 would be to explore, or what's the 70,000?
That would set up, that would be setting up the app and executing it.
I would hesitate to do that at this point. I would want to be able to hear, especially from Tom's Market. I mean, I would want to have some downtown business people involved in this discussion, unless that has already occurred. Has it?
So what I know is that, there have been 2 exploratory committees over the past 10 years that have talked about it, not in recent times though. So I think that's a good point.
So in the past, I have opposed it. I don't oppose it at this point, but I also don't think we should rush into it, especially when we have a deficit budget of putting another 70,000 without taking the time to meet with downtown business people and some other citizens to elevate it up for discussion before we, I don't think that would work well.
Okay.
Let me ask a question. Josue, do you know about how long it would take for us to break even if we went forward with an approximate $70,000?
So it depends on what model we want to roll out. So we've considered everything from a kiosk and a sign at the offsite parking lots, like the Railroad Street parking lot. And we've also looked at a model where putting kiosks in the downtown area and charging all in that downtown and off-street parking. So it depends on what program we do. The easiest one to roll out will be to post a kiosk and sign at off-site parking. So like the railroad. That's the least, the low-cost entry point. There are others. Well, there's one lower cost point than that, and that is special event parking and just putting up signs and requiring that all the users for special events such as street fair or any of the big events pay via the app. So that's the low cost. All that requires is printing the aluminum signs. So it depends on what model we choose. The 70,000 is closer in line with installing kiosks in the downtown area, multiple points where people can pay with coins, with credit card, or their app on the kiosk. That's the more involved option.
And I would think, there certainly has been my feeling, I think there's been a general agreement on this, that visitors would, the bulk of the income, the revenue would come from visitors, because residents would either have some special sticker or window mirror hanger or something to indicate that they can park either free and much or a very much reduced rate, but that cost for the residents would just be that for the sticker, but it wouldn't be a burden put on residents coming to park downtown.
Correct. That's one of the models we looked at. We don't want a nickel and dime our residents, if you will. There could be a permitting process where our residents will have a sticker. They'll pay for the sticker, just whatever the admin cost is for the stickers. And yeah, our enforcement team would know what's a resident or what's not a resident. The other way to do it too would be that we can create.
Just say, I don't know that we want to go
It's
way down
deep
the
in-
weeds.
deep in the weeds,
We've got
yeah.
a lot to do, so
Yeah.
it's going to be either let's look at a thing or not look at a thing,
But to your point, Kevin, we're looking at revenue opportunities that doesn't put it all on our residents. We're looking at the tourist.
Yeah, and I just wanted, as part of the conversation, to get that out, because that's, I think, a very critical piece for the residents.
Right.
But I think the other thing is, even from what I heard from Mary Ann, is we could include it in the budget, and it doesn't mean we spend that money. We would still have that discussion, and we would still look at it. So I guess I'm not hearing a reason not to include it in the budget. And then I think, once we're ready to process what that looks like, we could do that. So, but just because something is in the budget doesn't mean that we spend that money. So.
I would prefer not to, but if,
Okay. So then I think from here, I'm going to turn it over to Josue to talk about how we went from potentially a 1.2 million deficit to something more around 309,000 at this point. And I know we got a memo about that, so let's discuss that a little bit.
Yes, so since our last budget meeting, we've had several meetings internally about looking to right size and balance our budget. So since we've had Amy, so I want to start off by welcoming Amy Kemper. This is our finance director's first council meeting, so.
Welcome.
Wow, well, actually, if we're doing welcome, you know, watch out. I am. I'm not sure if you've got one of these village pins yet, but thank you, Amy.
Thank you, Brian. So since Amy's been on board, we've been reviewing our revenues, our expenses, or cash reserves. So I committed at the last budget meeting to come with a one-page document that does the big picture stuff. So the memo is the one-page document. So I've broken up the memo by what's our expense budget, what's our revenue, what is the deficit and cash reserves, and how those four numbers interact with each other. So on the budget side, I had reported in the last meeting that we've reduced our budget from 5 million to 4.2. Sorry, it was at 5 million. That created the 1.2 deficit. Since then, we've reduced our general fund budget down to 4.2 million. Now, this reduction isn't a cost-saving measure. It's a reallocation of where the expenses lie. So we shifted 759 expenses out to the different funds, Funds 202 and 204. And then we also found some adjustments to make in 306. So in a nutshell, we reallocated this expense. That brought the budget down to 4.2 for the general fund, which translates to a reduction in the transfers from the 1,696,000 to 972,000. And that as a result reduces the deficit to $306,085. So that's we'll be spending, and the budget as we have presented it, we'll be spending 306,000 over the revenue that we're receiving. So we'll be tapping into our cash reserves. So how much is our cash reserves? Yes.
I'm not clear that I understand. Are you saying we're planning on having the same expenses, but we're taking it from different pots?
Correct. So we have cash balances and 202 and 204 that are above the 90-day reserve. So in the current 2023 draft budget, we're proposing to utilize cash reserves in those pots of money to reduce the amount of transfers we make out of the general fund.
And these are funds that are in the capital, have been set aside for capital expense?
One of them is a capital. So 306 is capital, and 202 and 204 are the special revenue funds. 202 is the streets, and 204 is parks and recreation.
So just to make sure we're on the same page, I think what we're saying is it's not, I mean, we are still spending the money, but the reserve amount that we will have will go down, making it so that the annual budget remains the same, but the reserves that are available go down. Is that correct? So just, I mean, we are still spending the money. It's just not.
So we're dipping into our reserves.
Yes.
We still are, in just different pots. So instead of just dipping into the general fund reserves, we're now pulling cash reserves out of 202 and 204. Did I answer your
I
question?
guess, I mean, this is when, I'm not looking at numbers. I think I understand what you're saying. I'm not sure what to say about it.
Right, and this is what we had allocated in terms of time for this section of the budget update is 15 minutes. There's 4 other items. So this is the big picture view. Our budget, from a cost perspective, we haven't cut anything. In fact, we're actually looking at adding things to it. There are a few things I have to add to the budget. One is Denise Swinger is retiring in June, and we're going to add an expense there to assist with your transition. There's a lot of things that Denise does and only she knows and do, and they're critical in our economic development strategy to onboard the next person as soon as possible and as much as possible on that.
Yeah.
So we need to budget that expense. So there are a few things that are going to make it into the budget that are going to affect the number, but there'll be other things too that are going to affect our cash balances too. We've had a good year with Rita. Our revenues are up, and those are reflected in our cash balances. What's also contributed to our cash balance of right now, as of today, that it's at 1,986,000 is that we also had one-time revenue sources, such as the sale of Cresco that brought us in $270,000. So our cash position may go up, but in a nutshell, if we were to approve the budget, draft budget that we presented at the last meeting, we have the revenue and cash reserves to support that. We would be tapping into our reserves, which currently is at 1.9 million. And we would be tapping into that to the tune of 306,000. And that would still result in us having a cash reserve balance in our general fund above our 90-day reserve.
And just from so we had a finance committee meeting about some of this, and so just tell me if I say this wrong, but I think this is as good a time as any to make sure everybody's clear that, as I understand it, tell me if I'm wrong again, but that we have been dipping into our reserves for at least the last 3 years, meaning part of the way that the budget has balanced. So this thing, like, I'm not real excited about the idea of having to go in to get reserves, but functionally we have been doing that for years, in part because essentially we had unnecessarily high reserve amounts. And so it makes sense that everybody should have some realization that we don't have I would call it a structurally balanced budget, in that when we run out of reserves, and as I understand it, this year would be the year, right? If we spend down these, it'll get close. It depends on the income, but it'll get close enough. At some point here in the future, if we maintain all our operations as they are, we're not going to have that chunk of money to draw every year from reserves.
So I don't know that I understood that, or maybe I didn't, forgot, but what I did think was that we had put money aside for capital improvements over a period of years, and then over the last few years, we had been pulling that money out, which had been set aside for that purpose, so that's why the budget wasn't balanced, as opposed to dipping into reserves, which to me seems different. If we have a pot of money that we've been setting aside over 5 years or so because we want to do a project and then we use it, is different than dipping into reserves.
So I don't think those are different. I think, there was intentionality around setting up capital budgets and, essentially, as Gavin said, we had built up reserves, and, this was kind of that whole discussion around right-sizing our budgets. And so, but we're now at the point where we're not going to have a lot more money to pull out to supplement those capital budgets. But we're still above the 90-day, 90-day reserve. So, but yeah, so I think actually what you're thinking about, Marianne, is the same thing, which is that we intentionally pulled out that money because, we had, built these reserves up, and then we decided that we should invest that money in capital budgets and whatnot. So.
Okay.
So, in a nutshell, that's where we are.
So then that relates to part of this item is talking about other cuts. And again, as I frame this discussion, what we want to see on December 5th is, based on council's feelings, what that budget should come back and look like. And so my understanding is there are some thoughts about cuts to the budget that should be considered. And so this is the time to talk about that.
Well, I can do that. First off, as I said in an email, I did not ask for $35,000 for climate action. So just, I'm not, and the steering committee was not anticipating that money would come from the village government, so. And because everything was so delayed in getting the MOU, we're not really starting it until next year, anyway, so. Yes, so we heard from our senior staff at our last budget meeting. And first of all, I'm proud of our senior staff. I'm proud of all of our staff. I think everyone does an excellent job. I was taken by what Johnny said about feeling that he was understaffed and that he's been losing staff. I was hoping that we could add staff for him. I don't know how that would be at this point. I also met with the chief to sort of drill down, not so much into the budget, but how the department works and her ideas about the staffing. And I'm very impressed with all of the work that she has done. I also think that I am not convinced that we need the size police department that we have. I do not, there's a lot of unknowns, but when I lived here in the 70s and Antioch College was fairly vital, I'm going to suspect that there was as much stuff going on that police had to deal with at that point as there is now. Yes, we have more tourism now, but we have a much older population and much fewer young people running around. That's mostly young people who are getting into trouble. So I believe I do not support adding another person to the police department, and I would like to see some cuts, like as Kevin had suggested, not getting a new vehicle, maybe looking at some of the other things. I am impressed with our chiefs, with your ability to manage where people are working and what they're doing. And I know that if you have to, you can figure out how to do that. And that is something that I'm suggesting, to not add a person. I also think that a difference in the last 50 years, I'm sure, has been the bureaucracy that the police department faces. And I can definitely imagine that there needs to be more administrative staff, more help at that level. But I'm on council. I'm not really here to suggest how you manage the budget, but that would be my suggestion.
Okay. Gavin?
Well, I don't have any, I'd be happy to respond to how I would hear that, but I didn't have anything to add. Are you asking me about just other thoughts about the budget?
Yeah, so I think we're now at this point where, ultimately, we're sending indications back to the team about what we want to see in the next iteration of the budget.
Yeah, so just real quick to follow up on this, just to clarify, when we had met for Finance Committee, it sounded like the budget that you were adding up was where police was at status quo funding, not the funding that was discussed in the chief's presentation. Is that correct?
Correct. There are a couple of things that are net neutral from an expense perspective, and Paige just talked through that, like some of the supervisory position, the deputy chief of police position. That's
okay.
We're doing away with the sergeant role. What is not currently included in the budget is the 21,000 wage difference that was presented. That hasn't made it into the budget yet.
Okay, I was just making sure. I didn't know if it's like when you read a thing in the paper, it looks like, oh, this is the new budget, and at least what we had discussed was that essentially it's just right now it's just flat. right? Okay, so just so we know that.
Yeah, and I think that that's an important thing that you bring up. I think there's some, a clarification needed. We're not proposing to add more to the head count. There are some changes in roles and how the schedulings happen that would have the same net effect on people, but they're just look different from what they have in the past. So a good example is we've had 2 sergeant roles in the past. We're going to do away with the sergeant role and have a deputy police chief. So we're not adding personnel overall.
Okay, so anyway, go ahead.
When,
You mind if I jump in while we're talking about police? You mentioned, excuse me, bad talking to start talking. But you mentioned a $21,000 difference with respect to salary. I'm just wondering, have we begun counting the green ESC revenue to sort of balance that out?
Yes and no. So in their last finance committee, I suggested to the finance committee team that we could pay for that from the additional revenue coming in. There was some concern about aligning income and revenues with a specific activity because it all goes to the same pot. So, but yes, we have identified revenue sources and where they can go to offset costs.
Right, thank you.
And I'm the squeaky wheel on that. This has nothing to do with the YOO piece. It's in general the practice of, X amount of money came in from loss in place or YOO contract, or there's been many of them, a sale of a thing. And then we're like, that's a separate chunk. And I guess I just look at it like we're all in this together. Like it's one big budget. And so, and especially in this current context, and I'm really sorry I missed the beginning of the meeting, so I'm sorry if I'm duplicating something. But the big picture for me in terms of my feedback is related to this, which is we don't have any extra money. We have to get into reserves, and we're not going to have those reserves regularly going forward to maintain a balanced budget. So even if there is a revenue source of 20,000 here or 30,000 for this thing or that thing, all that goes into just getting us to what is frankly close enough, because we're assuming the auditor projections are overly conservative, to assume that we can get to a pretty balanced budget. So my big feedback or takeaway is the same as it was in council, which is that in the finance committee, which is just that I feel like anything that is above and beyond basic staff operations, we've got to think seriously about, because adding on anything from our level beyond this is going to get us into a place where it seems like it could be really questionable as to whether or not we're going to get to a balance at the end of the year, and that we're already over what it costs to maintain our operations on an annual basis. So that's my big feedback, is just seems like this is the year of like rein in costs so that we can focus on our basic services. And I think what I've heard that Mary Ann just mentioned, the need to invest in public works feels like, to me, that seems like the area where if I'm going to try to do something, making sure that the people who keep our lights on, the people who keep our sewers, clean, et cetera, that seems like the area where there's the most acute need, just for whatever that's worth.
I would like to say something else, which is something that has to happen another time, but in terms of wages and salaries, in terms of the whole organization, and I think I heard that there was going to be a study done, but it seems like we need to know that all of the departments are being paid equitably compared to each other. Even if we're lower than Beaver Creek or whatever, at least there's equity. And I don't know if that's the case or not, but I think that that's important, especially when we're being so tight.
So I think related to that, Josue, you had mentioned to me, and Mary Ann brought up the point about public works. So, yeah, what are we looking at there? And I don't know if you're talking about that or Johnny's talking about that, but it seems like that hasn't been totally contemplated in this budget.
Some of it hasn't shown at the budget because of the mechanisms to get us to there, but Johnny's got some good talking points, some things to go through on this. But yes, we've contemplated different models. We started doing some work earlier in the year to look at how we could restructure the team, the public works, particularly the electric distribution and water distribution team, to create a more equitable pay structure there. That's where we're struggling because of the market conditions of that labor sector. But certainly we want to pay all of our staff more. It's what's within our means to do. Johnny?
And actually, before you jump in, I was reminded that I got an email today from a citizen that said, we need to talk into the mics. And I know they weren't talking about me, but just make sure that when we do speak,
Were they talking about me?
well, I have heard that you are probably the worst offender, but like seeing Johnny focus on the mic. So go ahead.
Okay, so first off, I say yes, Marion. I appreciate everybody looking into public works. I do think pay study for the entire village and job descriptions for the entire village would probably be, Josue and I've looked at it. We have got numbers for it to be able to do so. So we could actually try to put that in the budget to be able to help us out across the board from council all the way down to the janitor to be able to help us. Public Works itself, we would like to separate under the same superintendent, but be able to have dedicated linemen and then have 2 dedicated water guys. We have looked into the apprenticeship school so we can have qualified linemen. We have looked at putting a different pay scale in just for the linemen so they can be competitive wages right off the bat. They would be, instead of a regular merit increase, they would actually be on a testing. So once they go up the chain of the apprenticeship into the journeymans, they would follow their pay grade till they top out as the qualified linemen. Water and electric, I think we can do it by changing the contractors. Right now, I looked at right before we come in, we paid one company in the last 3 years, we paid them $200,000 to do line work. If we had a dedicated line crew that was not doing line work and then have to break off to do a water main break, we could actually concentrate doing more electric. Comparison for the two, and I'll give you this one because I was talking with Paige this morning. Compare a lineman and a water guy to a PD and parks department. You want PD to be there, you want them to be bulletproof vests, you want them to do this, but while they're not doing PD work, you want them to do mowing of the grass, weed eating and trimming. We're doing the same thing with the electric and the water. So we would like to add 2 water guys to the department and then change the lineman pay, so you got 2 different pay structures. I can do that by offsetting the costs of the professional services and the contractors. And then when you drop down to the streets, we need 1 more person, and we also got to figure out something with mowing 76 acres of grass once a week, if not twice a week, plus doing all the ball diamonds. But we need 1 more person. If we have 1 more person at the bottom to be able to start off at the bottom, again, it would help us out being able to do sewer and storm at the same time as we're mowing grass with 2 lower paid guys versus 4 people riding mowers 5 days a week from end of April all the way to August. So that's my changes. That's what I'm proposing. I don't think it's an increase in actual budget, but it's a reallocation of professional services, contractors, money going into wages versus into contractual services.
Okay, so just to be clear, are these changes in these numbers?
No.
Okay,
Well, they would be, but they're under contractors.
okay,
So we would have to reallocate those numbers to be able to put them into wages and benefits versus into the professional services and contractors.
yeah, okay. So,
To that question, we started looking at this, at the linemen, at the apprenticeship school and restructuring the public works team back in, I want to say, April, May of this year. And like a lot of things, we have another crisis that starts and diverts us. So at that time, we have found a way that by redirecting contractor expenses, we can cover the wage difference in the lineman. For the water and the water crew, we identified opportunities then. Today, we discussed that council has approved stormwater fees, and that's expected to bring in $100,000. We just had a great example of the streets team that they redid a sinkhole or repaired a storm drain on Polecat Road. A road was sinking, and our team did an outstanding job, but it requires them to be available, come off the mowers to do that. So that's another revenue opportunity that we are going to have in 2023, that we can reallocate that revenue and expense back to our team. So we create capacity by doing exactly what Johnny said. Let's take some employees that are commanding a lower wage to just take care of the mowing and all that busy work that we have to do, and dedicate the other specialized members of the team to do more of that higher level work.
Sure.
And from a cost perspective, it remains the same or relatively the same. Might and be some initial increases with John and Scott are here to talk about in the utilities, but we can cover some of that with minimal increases.
Well, for whatever it's worth, that seems like a no-brainer to me. And the idea of if we can get more of what you're saying, hey, we were talking in the budget meetings, we're doing 10 people's work with four staff. If we can get ultimately the same amount of work done in a better way with more staff, and it's budget neutral, well then.
But I'll give you a real fast scenario. $4,000 a day for a contractor that has 4 linemen, and that's 3 to 1. So if we pay our guys, even the top rate of a top lineman on the new scale, it's $1,200 versus $4,000. And we're helping the morale, we're helping the village, they're focusing. And right now, that's what we need to do. Let me hit a couple more points on employee retention. Making sure that we're not 4 guys and doing 10 people is worth of work. Competitive wages, alignment scale, being able to take vacation and having somebody cover you. Right now, my lineman's on vacation, or the superintendent. I'm on call for that lineman because I'm the qualified lineman when he's out. And so I'm kind of doing dual roles with everybody else. On-call pay, guys are on call 24 hours a day and they don't get a penny for being on call. They don't have to answer their phone. Saturday, prime example, I was out to eat in Plain City. I get a call, we had a water main break, and I get the call. Now, luckily, I was able to get somebody to come in and investigate it, and it didn't turn out to be as bad as we thought. But they don't have to answer that phone, but it's hard for them to plan to relax, knowing that any minute their phone could ring and we're going to ask them to come back into the village. And if they don't answer it, it comes downhill. And normally if it hits me and I don't answer, then it goes to Josue. And then Josue's got to try to find somebody to come in and help as well. And then separating the rest of it, I've already talked about, but those are the main key things. Employee retention, for me, for Paige, it's huge because she's got the cost as well as I do for retraining, repurposing. We actually have one of our linemen that is actually transferring to the wastewater treatment plant. And the main reason why he's going out there, same money, less work. He doesn't have to worry about getting called in all the time for squirrels or for water main break. He's on worry about the plants and the wastewater treatment plant. And it's going to be a good home for him for next 8 to 10 years, hopefully, he retires. So
it's come up in the past, concern around how many FTEs we have. So is that a concern here?
No, I think that's just a self-imposed handicap to not grow. And
I would agree.
I don't see that as a concern. At some point, someone was worried about unionization in the village. I'm not worried about that. We have great benefits and great team. No Elon Musks in the building.
Well, and I want to just make this one point. I'll sit down. We try to do the best we can do in this village for the members of the village, for council, for the fire department, for the school. And we need to make sure that we're treating our staff with the same priorities as we are for the environment, for everything that we do. If we treat the staff and we pay the staff well, we're going to be the place that everybody's wanting to come work at. And that creates a different atmosphere for this department, for this team. I can't say no more about her. She has changed the atmosphere downstairs. It's a pleasure to walk into that PD. It's a pleasure to be able to walk out in the parking lot and see an officer and just have a conversation with them. That has changed since 2014. I've been here since 2014, and me and her, me and the other team members, we all work very well together, and that's compliments to Paige.
Okay.
Soon it's going to be a pleasure to come to council meetings, right? No, I mean, but in all seriousness, to this end, so one of the things I think that I heard loud and clear, and I feel like I've heard it from colleagues here, so I just want to, say it as it pertains to the public works, and not just public works, but all of our staffing, is that when we're in a tight budget situation, from my perspective, anything that we're going to do that's essentially what I would consider to be discretionary, and particularly council budget requests, has to be able to be more valuable than investing in our people. So that while there are a bunch of things that we've done, $1,000, I'm not going to go into them, but a bunch of the things that we do one at a time, that if we have enough money are great things to do. But right now, I guess I look at it like, we got to first show our people that we're going to invest in them. And only after we have the resources beyond doing that to a way that we can feel good about, then does it make sense to invest in other things. So, which is what I would hope would be the point at which it might actually be a joy to come to a council meeting, that you would know that you're respected and vice versa.
Thank you, Gavin.
Okay. Yeah, well, so I think there's a clear indication that we want to build this into the budget. I feel like we've been talking about this since the kind of breakthrough retreat that we had. And so, yeah, it's good to hear that, like, clarity. I guess the other thing is, I'm not convinced that it's budget neutral, but I imagine that it would have a payoff. I mean, I think there are like other aspects like the benefits and whatnot, but again, I've never been worried about the FTEs, so, I've heard this thing, but, the idea that we should be, concerned about going over 50 because of unionization, like that should not be a philosophy of our village in my mind.
I agree.
Marianne?
There's another income potential source that we've talked about, and I want to see if there's interest at council, which is making it easier for retired people with money to donate to the village. I think it has a potential. For example, I could see people, maybe they would want to give money to the pool or to the parks or some of the things that at this point have been cut out. And I would be willing, and probably it would involve, or maybe involve working with the community foundation. I'd be willing to investigate that if there is interest in that.
Yes.
So
And that also reminds me, we're supposed to investigate the capital gains thing that
Yes.
Indian Hills is doing. So,
CEO of Rita will be here tomorrow.
yep, that's right. We are having that meeting.
No, I'm
So,
not here, I'm asking council
I'm saying
members.
yes.
Yes.
I'm interested in you looking at that.
And for us, Marianne, the administration side, there are opportunities where people can donate to capital projects. We need the concrete skirt all around the pool. We need a new bathhouse in the pool. Well, we want to renovate it. All those things are things that we could raise capital for and give name recognition to folks that want to contribute to those things.
okay. Yeah, thanks for highlighting that, Marianne. Go ahead, Gavin.
So I just want to make sure we're all on the same page. I feel like we got some stuff in Finance Committee I'm not sure that everybody has, so maybe you already know. But just to be clear, this budget right now, this includes no council appropriations. Is that correct? As in, like, this doesn't have any of the requests that we've gotten in, it doesn't
Correct.
have the typical commission budgets, et cetera, okay?
It probably has our
It does have the
35,000,
Yeah,
right?
it has the mediation program, not to the tune of 10,000. It's got it at 7,500, 6,000 for the professional service, the wages, and then printing and advertisement. That's, and $1,000 in training. So that's not the full 10,000, but there's mediation money already. There is the
Commissions.
commission's budget, we said 25,000. The other things are not there. There's 60,000 or 70,000 for CRB, it's not in there. Neither is the home inc, or I understood from Mary Ann that the climate action is coming off the table.
So so you said 25,000, so right now is it 25,000 total commission budget?
Yes.
Okay. So just making sure we're all clear that that's a significant change from the past, and that,
No, that's, I mean, that's status quo.
That's what it had been.
sorry, status quo for commissions, I'm talking about, but things like the home inc, investments, like, is there anything for events in there then?
It comes out of that same 25.
So that's all part of the 25, okay.
Yeah, and
Okay, I'm just
nobody-
making sure everybody's aware of what's not in here.
Yeah.
So that we're not like, freaked out or whatever later on.
Right.
Brian, you began the conversation about increasing revenues. Has the discussion of a municipal bond been tabled for now?
I think it's a separate discussion.
It is.
So, because it does relate to, and I saw that we've got something on the agenda about starting to deal with our galvanized, iron pipes or whatever. But yeah, so I think not tabled, but separate. And but not part of this budget.
Gotcha.
But that was kind of the last thing. We've got a few more minutes. Was talking about what we're thinking about with council budget. So I think there are two things to think about here. One is I'd mentioned the thing about maybe all events should be in kind. And again, that has a cost, but also, we've got a staff that's continued to do that. I am guessing, do we budget for Bryan Center rentals? And do we budget that revenue?
We do a small amount of that, yes. But it's one of those things that you can estimate a certain amount. The rest of it, it's a moving target.
Right. But for the most part, I mean,
Yeah.
if we do Pride or whatever, we're not necessarily counting on that revenue, right?
Yeah, to support operations, no.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, this year, one of the things that we made the change in 204 is estimating that pool emissions and rentals revenue to 61,000.
Okay.
So the budget works if we get that 61,000, which I think there's high probability that we can raise that revenue in the pool.
Right. So anyway, that kind of comes back to, again, just because something is in the budget doesn't mean we need to spend it. And, so maybe it makes sense to maintain that status quo. But, I think that is the other thing that's kind of up for discussion is, do we continue to allocate that 25,000 for commissions and so forth? So
I think Johnny may have wanted to say something.
I think we need to make sure that when we do the pride events and stuff, that staff time is not in the budget. So we have to cover our costs to be able to provide the staff for security, for Bryan Center, for trash pickup and all that. That's part of the fees. So if that's waived, then that goes against us on our budget.
okay. And this year we did contemplate that, so it's a good point. I mean, we said we were gonna cover those costs out of the council budget. So, okay, yeah, thanks for highlighting that. So anyway, so I think that's the other, thing that's on the table for us to think about. And again, what do we want the budget to come back looking like? So.
I want to continue on this vein. So for example, street fair, which is, I don't know,
20,000, we said.
20,000 a shot, is not in the budget. So, I mean,
We've never budgeted for that, really, yeah.
but it needs to be accounted for.
Mhm.
So I don't know whether we want to have a certain pot that we're saying this is for events, and then we're going to have to decide what events or how it gets used. But if we have such a tight budget, I don't think we can just assume we can have these events with in-kind contribution when it's not budgeted.
Yep. Gavin?
Well, I guess, and I'm sorry, I probably should ask this about Finance Committee. So Amy, Josue, if either of you can help me understand. So like right now, we're talking about a $306,000 deficit. And I think when we were talking in Finance Committee, that seemed relatively comfortable to you. Is there a number you have in mind that starts to not get comfortable? So just to use that as an example, if we had 50 grand in events expenses, are we still in range, or is this like you're already pushing it?
Well, the charter says we bring a balanced budget.
I understand.
We're not there. So ideally, we want to bring a structurally balanced budget. One of the things I keep an eye on is how much cash reserves we have to maintain everything that we do. So one of the things we talk about a lot that we've been talking about 3 years is staying above a 90-day reserve. So that keeps us out of trouble. It keeps everything operating. So what that number looks like when in our current budget is 1.4 million that we want to keep in the general fund reserve. So suppose that we go with this budget as it is, we have 1.9 million in the reserves. We dip by 300,000. We're at 1.6. We're still slightly above the 90-day reserve. So I think that once we get to that 1.4, it gets uncomfortable. And the challenge is you don't want to just get to the cliff and then react, because then it's much more painful. So we want to be proactive about it, not wait to get to the cliff and then start making cuts, because there are conditions that we can't predict. We couldn't predict the pandemic, right?
Yeah,
we couldn't predict
I got
that.
you.
And there are other things that we don't.
The reason I'm bringing this up is to answer the question. From my perspective, if I'm understanding correctly, we're on a tight budget here. And so I think I am inclined to invest in staff and try to keep our council budgets as slim as possible. At least in the meantime, I wouldn't be opposed to like checking how revenues are coming in 3 months in and then figuring out how to allocate some things. But I would err on the side of less money in council budget and more money toward staff needs. That's how I lean, Brian.
Yeah, and that is a methodology that has been deployed here in the village and elsewhere, where you start with a base budget and check in at a certain period and make any adjustments. But just tonight, you're hearing a supplemental where we're adding expenses to the budget. Why? Because economic conditions have changed, that we need to spend this money. So
I will say, we also have to recognize that street fairs and pride events and other things do support our businesses, and and I don't think we can totally cut those out. So I think what this means is the other thing we need to understand on December 5th is what those in-kind costs really are about. Yes. So, I think you gave us an estimate of 20,000 for street fair. And we got to think about, some of these other signature events. But, I think this is also why we're talking about other revenue sources like reciprocal tax and paid parking and whatnot, because there's got to be a little bit of a balance. So I think we've got to have a good accounting for that. But it sounds like, maybe we're talking about an amount of 50,000 that covers commissions and events and whatnot. And then, whether we cut that down or not. But based on, some of the things that I know are already in the mix that I think make sense, like village mediation, I think is important. I think environmental commission is important. I think some of these events are important. So anyway, so I think we need that accounting. We need to know, what it means to invest in public works. And then we've got 2 meetings in December where we're going to talk about this more. So we've got a couple more minutes, but I'd ideally like to give us a brief break before we transition into the meeting. So
I think that given that we don't know where we are with events in particular, and probably Home Inc., that we should reach out to the organizations that might be assuming they're going to count on us and say, we're not sure how this is going to go. Or whatever.
Yep.
We want to do something, but it probably won't be what we've done in the past.
it's a great idea.
Or we might not do anything.
Yep. Okay.
Great, so I've got my task list. Do you need anything from me on reciprocal tax, paid parking?
We're talking about,
Those are-
okay, so reciprocal tax, we're talking about on the 7th, when we have our joint meeting, which I'm excited because looks like all the bodies are coming forward, and we'll talk about that in a minute.
Okay.
But yes, we do, like I said, I want to see paid parking in the budget, and then we'll decide whether to vote it up or down. So,
Can I just say a real quick thing about paid parking? I have no idea how you're coming up with $70,000 because that is not my understanding at all of getting an app and marking spaces. It is very low cost. That's so out of proportion to any.
well, like you said, we don't need to get in the weeds right now.
Right,
So, yeah,
but
but
I'm
anyway.
just saying, I don't think you need to pull $70,000. So if
Yep.
that can come back as a different number, I'd be happier.
Yep.
We for paid parking, I can draft up the different models we discussed. The signage, what is just signs, what is kiosks, and what does a permit system look like?
Okay,
So you asked for what we need, Josue. What I would really like is to have these spreadsheets. Because and I'd really like if you could send what you're working on today, tomorrow, and then if you needed to send us something the day of, great, but it's really hard for us to participate fully without having these spreadsheets with enough time to look at them.
Right, I understand it for the purpose of this meeting was meant to be high-level stuff, the one pager that was asked at the last.
I
meeting,
understand,
so-
but we didn't get the spreadsheets from the last meeting either. We got the spreadsheets at the meeting, like a physical piece of paper, but it'll really help us to be able to have a sense of what's in there and then to see the change over time if we can get the spreadsheets.
Okay, well, I'll work with Amy to get you guys all the spreadsheets.
okay, so we're going to take a 3-minute break, and then we're going to come back and do some announcements. Ready? I want to get some water. and we always have some good announcements. And actually, we're going to kick off the announcements with, I'd seen on social media some confusion about the project related to the prior Antioch College power plant. So I was happy that Paul and Nick reached out to clarify why we have supported that project. And it has a lot to do with safety, and not that we didn't all love the structure. And so with that, Paul, I guess I'm going to pull you up and give you a couple minutes.
Thanks, Brian. I think
Or Nick, yeah.
Just give a quick intro.
Okay.
And Paul is the one who's really well versed in this. He's been, as a volunteer, the project manager for it. But in brief, 93 years ago, our predecessors greenlit the construction of a coal-fired power plant in the newly created Glen Helen Nature Preserve. They placed it in a quarry next to a spring-fed wetland, just upslope from some of the highest ecological quality habitats in the Yellow Springs Creek watershed. It was simply a terrible place to site an industrial facility. Eventually, the plant stopped producing power for the village. Then it stopped producing heat for the Antioch campus. It sat abandoned for the last 15 years, attracting vandals who broke every window in the structure, put themselves at great personal risk, climbing to the upper reaches of the structure to empty can after can of spray paint. The conservation easements that we put in place a number of years ago to permanently protect the Glen from ever being subdivided meant that when the Glen Helen Association acquired the preserve from Antioch College, we had to buy the power plant as well. The $125,000 grant from the village of Yellow Springs provided crucial matching funds for the demolition. It was instrumental leverage as we pursued the remaining funds from the Clean Ohio Conservation Fund. We're grateful that the village helped make this crucial work possible. Look forward to Paul's remarks sharing the update with you.
Thanks, Nick.
Thanks, Nick. Yeah, I'm Paul Sampson, and I'm the volunteer program manager for power plant demolition. I have a presentation up there I'm going to chat about. There's a few pictures in there. Pictures worth 1,000 words. So Brian told me I don't have much time, so I'm going to go into the state abandonment prior to the demolition, and then also some of the safety concerns. I would like to touch on those. And what you're seeing up there is on the left-hand colored picture is actually George's workshop, affectionately known, and then also another to the right of that building is another maintenance shop. And as you can see, everything is well tagged, and doors are broken. That a garage door was chained. Everything was smashed. And as a matter of fact, where you see the orange color, there was non-friable asbestos there. We had homeless people there, drug paraphernalia, you name it. Just real quick, friable asbestos is stuff you can crush in your hand, gets in the air, you can breathe it in, very dangerous. Non-friable, dangerous, but it tends to be contained. So we'll go to the next slide on that. And so I'm going to get into the power plant state of abandonment. And in this particular slide, again, the cement structure, everything's tagged, all the windows are broken. I'm up on the right-hand top corner picture. And at one time I came by there and there was a fire hose hanging out of the second floor window. And that's how some vandals actually got up inside. And the other one is to the left of the top, and that particular slide is the bottom portion of that building, and you can see the state of disrepair that's in. There's also friable asbestos running through pipes in that particular building, a number of junction boxes, and in the lower right-hand corner, again, another pipe coming across with a lot of friable. The chimney's in there. I didn't get a good picture for you guys to take a look at, but if you ever got up close to it, it actually had a slight slant or tilt or bend to it. So it was in a state of disrepair. You go to the next one. Here, again, the top two, now we're down into the actual quarry. And one of the large pipes is actually friable asbestos again, and you can see how the windows and doors are smashed. We've got a transformer in there. When the Glen Helen Association bought the Glen from Antioch College, That transformer was live, and I'm not sure what was live in the building, but it was totally open, and there were a number of large electrical panels that were open inside of that building. You see a number of chemical containers. I did get to see a few MSDS sheets. There was nothing really toxic in there, and all those containers you see in there, they were empty. So Antioch did a good job as far as buttoning it up chemical-wise. You go to the next one. On the next slide, please. Again, other pictures, one on the right-hand side, you see 3 transformers. So those are dated pre-1980. And then so you would suspect that there were PCBs in there. Just to let you know, we had 2 separate companies come in and test those to make sure that if there were PCBs in there, we had to control it a certain way. There weren't any in that. Again, some more electronics, everything tends to be destroyed. That is actually a picture, center bottom of the chimney, or the smokestack, if you will, and probably just a few rungs from the top, they're pulling out. And then notice the cracks along the chimney in there. So it was in a bad state of disrepair at one point in time, probably 20 years ago. Antioch College had the top of that chimney cut down because they had a number of cracks and fractures in it, and then put a copper top on it. But as you can see, it's still deteriorated. And then that one on the lower right-hand corner, we're looking down at some of the other structures below that were all tagged on the walls. Well, now the graffiti artists went and started tagging the roofs. And in the lower right-hand corner, that roof is actually caving in. So next slide. Again, there was a Kohler generator in there, 125 kilowatt. The contractor, Fillmore, actually took that and salvaged that. On the top right-hand side, that is fly ash dust collectors. That's about 2 stories high, all friable asbestos, about 3 inches thick. And the EnviroWorks, who did the asbestos abatement, did a fantastic job on removing all of this. They tented negative pressure and got all that out. On the right-hand side, I just want to mention that to you folks. This is pre-demolition. You can see that if someone were to drive a car down that green path right there, you'd go over the cliff into the quarry. Next slide. You're probably familiar with the oil tank or diesel fuel tank that was out there. That's about a 20,000 gallon tank, and that was removed by the contractor and salvaged. The tank to the right is a 500 gallon diesel fuel tank, and that was also removed. Down in the lower left-hand corner, some of you may recognize those structures. They're across from the Women's Park, and so all of that's tagged. We've had homeless in there, so we decided to take those structures out of the area too. And the lower right-hand corner, if you see a little well cap there, there's a 6-inch well, 45 feet deep, and has no cap on it. That was been there for many, many years. Next slide, please. That was the state of the power plant before we demoed it. I'm going to touch a couple things here that are important. We went and did a competitive bid, both for the asbestos and for the demolition per Ohio Revised Code. And we also conducted an asbestos survey. H&H went out there and found all the possible sources of asbestos on the site. And there's a report available if anybody's interested. We completed environmental site assessment, phase 1 and 2. The phase 1's about 260 pages. The phase 2 is about 30 pages. We didn't find anything that was very toxic at all, other than to check those transformers. I talked about PCBs. So we really didn't need to do an extensive phase 2, but we went ahead and did one anyway. We did a ground soil samples testing, actually took some ground soil sample out of the center of the smokestack. And I went in there with a Geiger counter, make sure there was no radiation left. You've been burning coal for I don't know how many years, and that's a possible contaminant that could be in there. So we did hold a kickoff. Important point here is that EnviroWorks went in there and removed all the asbestos from the site, about $65,000 to $68,000 by the time they were done. And then Fillmore came in and demoed the site after all the asbestos was gone. We had a history presentation by Scott Sanders on Sunday, and they did a great job over there. But there were a few people in the room that thought that, well, they just demoed everything with the asbestos in it and hauled it off. All the contaminants were taken out of it before it was demoed. Next slide, please. So safety areas that were addressed real quick, those 3 transformers, double checked with 2 independent companies, and they were actually physically removed and drained off-site. We're going across the top right. That is actually a junction box that goes across the street to Antioch College. There's 3 sets of 3 high power wires in there. So the 3-phase, either 240 or 480. I had Triac Electric come in, and they prepped all those wires for pull through and made sure that they were not charged. So they pulled all that through. So there's no electric in the on the demo site, and those wires don't exist anymore on Antioch's side. So somebody 50 years from now will come and, maybe hook a wire back up. The mystery pit. So these 2 pits, nobody really knew they existed up there. That pit is about 20 feet deep, and that's about 8 feet of water in it. They take off the cement cap, somebody went in there, they would drown. And there were 2 of those up there. So the bottoms were busted out, drained water, and they're totally full. So they're not a safety hazard anymore. On the right-hand top corner, that's actually some of the scaffolding and the tenting that they used, the asbestos company, when they removed the asbestos. If you see the floor, it's about as clean as it's ever been in about 20 years. That's because they removed, if there was asbestos in the area, they removed all of the debris on the bottom, and then actually came through after with a vacuum. I'm going to keep going real fast.
So actually, Paul, I think you've done a great job of
Too much.
showing us the value of the project. So what I'm going to say is, I'd love for you to write up this slide and we can put it in the next packet. But I think thanks for your.
Let me just go through a couple more, Brian, just real quick, if there might be.
All right, so you have taken 10 minutes in the 5 minutes that I've given you, so.
Not a problem, all right.
Yeah, but we appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks.
Yeah, great work. Okay, so I think, Josue, you had a few announcements?
Yes, I do. I got a couple celebratory announcements. We've got 2 events happening on December 3rd. We've got tree lighting at 6 p.m. at the intersection of Limestone and Xenia. So look forward to having that event and look forward to seeing all of you there. Also on that day, we have the school forest. I think you're a partner of this, Nick, and that's happening on Saturday the 3rd from 9 to 3 p.m. And then finally, we are starting our Willing Gaunt flour and sugar distribution. Johnny and the Public Works crew are starting that distribution. So,
Okay.
that's the updates.
A few other things to announce. So we have our public safety work session. That's December 1st, am I right? Yes, from 3 to 5 p.m. I wanted to clarify, because I think it was a little bit unclear in the YS News, that Paige's amazing Zoom meeting about the police budget was designed for council members to watch when they were able. So it was great that Kevin and Gavin could be there. Mary Ann and I were in a meeting, Carmen was working, but I don't want anyone to think that we didn't all watch that meeting, because we did, and there was a lot of great information. I wanted to say a happy belated birthday to Carmen. So yes, I saw that you're 122 on Facebook, so you look great. And we already welcomed Amy, so thank you for being here. Also, we had a great welcome to Diane Diller, our new Village Mediation Program Manager. And last thing is, happy to announce our joint meeting with the school board and the township on December 7th from 6 to 8 p.m. And that's going to take us into the consent agenda, unless there are any other announcements. Okay. So the consent agenda, we've got the minutes from our November 7th regular session meeting, and
Folks, did you get a chance to look at the ones for the 9th, or do we bump them? I sent them out earlier.
I think we did, but we'll pull them off
No, I
and
mean,
make sure.
if people had a chance to look at them and you can approve them in this meeting, fantastic.
We got to do them separately anyway, so.
But yes,
Okay.
but I wanted to add those if folks had a chance.
Yes. Okay, so on the November 7th regular session meeting minutes, I'll entertain a motion to approve.
So moved.
Okay, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. And if you were able to read the minutes from our budget session on November 9th, I'll entertain a motion to approve.
I move.
Second.
All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All right. Any opposed? Okay. So we're reviewing the agenda, and although it's on our agenda that's in front of us, I think, Carmen, we still need to officially add your items. Do you want to go ahead and mention that?
It's under new business, it's there.
Yeah, but it wasn't in the paper, so I just want to officially.
Oh, so proposal to improve communications and efficiency between staff and boards and commissions.
Okay. And so we will add that to new business. Anything else on the agenda review? Okay. Kevin, petitions and communications.
Thank you, Brian. Good evening, everyone. We've got in our packet 2 reports from the clerk of courts offering the mayor's court reports. There's a communication from Greene County Public Health advising of the nurse-family partnership that's been established to help families that need that assistance. Also from Greene County Public Health, a reminder to don't drive drunk. We have a letter from Judith Hempfling complaining about, with a letter with a complaint about sidewalk complaints. And then we also have a letter from Matt Raska regarding the police department budget, and that's what we have on file currently regarding petitions and communications.
All right, thank you, Kevin.
Thank you.
So as we move into legislation, and something that we added last time per charter was, I'm going to ask for a motion. We've got a second reading of ordinance 2022-38 and 2 emergency readings, 2022-37 and 39, or I'm sorry, 40. And so I'm going to ask for a motion to read those in by title only.
I move that we allow these ordinances to be read by title only.
Okay, we have a second?
Second.
Okay, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, great. So Judy, let's go ahead and read emergency ordinance 2022-37 by title only.
All right, this is repealing old section 1060.05 service charges of chapter 1060, storage and collection of garbage and other wastes of title 6, other public services of part 10 streets, utilities and public services of the codified ordinances of the village of Yellow Springs, Ohio, and enacting a new section 1060.05 service charges and declaring an emergency.
All right, can I get a motion?
So moved.
All right. All right, so Josue, I don't think we need to go through the presentation, but we should talk about the 2 options.
Okay, I'll do a verbal unless you want to see the slides. I have a full presentation.
I don't think we need those.
Okay, so the option 1 is, as it was presented, the previous council meeting, which includes the 10% increase that we get from Rumkey, we're passing that along to our customers. There's one change we did do is we negotiated the spring cleanup at a flat fee and then adjusted the rates to incorporate the spring cleanup. That way, we don't have to take registration from any of our residents. Folks can just feel free to have the bazaar style spring cleanup at no additional cost other than what's been negotiated. So that's included, option 2.
And that's bizarre, BAZAAR, right?
Yes. Yes, not an easy, no, yes. Thank you, Brian. Oh, I don't know what that's about. All right. So the option 2, it's everything in the option 1 plus a 2% fee added on to provide revenue stream for educational service and or piloting organic waste reduction strategies, such as piloting organic waste collection at farmers market. That's been one of the proposals that have been pitched around. 2 years ago, as I noted in my memo, I was a strong advocate for the program because I saw it as a real opportunity to strengthen local collaboration with local community groups that were already doing this work and looking to expand business offerings in that space. I also saw it as an opportunity to have an impact on our increasing costs for solid waste. Given the economic environment where we're passing on a 10% increase to our customers and the pricing has been negotiated for the next 5 years, whatever we do is going to have little impact on our rates. So for those reasons, it's difficult for me to recommend anything other than option one. However, we remain committed to looking at ways how we improve solid waste services in the village.
All right, thanks, Josue. So, Marianne, do you want to speak to option two?
Yeah, well, as Josue noted, he had had this idea of linking a modest fee tagged on to what we charge for solid waste, I guess 2020. This year, he asked me to come in to talk about it, and I had assumed we were both in agreement that we were going to go forward, so I was surprised that he hadn't included it initially in the at our last meeting. So I brought it up, so I'm in this odd position of thinking we were both for it and now finding out he's not. At any rate, just to say, I assume everyone here understands that the way that we produce goods, not just this country, but this country is probably the worst offender, cannot sustain itself. We use raw materials, we throw stuff away during production, and then we create all this stuff that we throw away too. And at some point in our lifetime, my understanding is there's going to be as much plastic in the oceans as there are life forms. So what we are doing in Yellow Springs when we supposedly recycle is what, maybe 9% of recycled stuff actually gets recycled. A lot of people, they put stuff in recycling that shouldn't go in, or they put it in and they don't clean it, or they don't put things in recycling that could go in. So the whole recycling thing is one thing. Another option, and I mentioned in here, not only does California and Vermont have rules about not putting organic waste in your trash, but even in Ohio, Bexley, Ohio, started a program, and now they have a 30% of the households in Bexley put out their compost. So it's possible to do it. I figured the modest 2% would mean on the lowest tier, 32 cents extra a month, which translates to $3.84 a year. So it's not taking anything out of it's not an extra expense. I mean, we're passing it on. So I think and if we were to do this, I would ask council to charge the Environmental Commission to work with staff and whomever else, the Agraria, Climate Action, to set up some programs. The money would accumulate over time, so I think Josue figured out at the end of the year it'd be about $7,000. So, you know, it's one way to fund making a change. We have these meetings in UN that are, I guess they're done, I think. We know things have to happen at the global level and the national level and at the state level. And we have to do our part. And if we don't do it, 20 or 30 years from now, my grandchildren are going to say, how come you didn't do anything about this? Like we're saying now about how come those councils, 20 years ago didn't fix our sewer? Why are we in the position we're in? So, that's my stand.
Does Bexley use Rumpke?
I don't know who Bexley uses. I just found, I forget where I saw that figure.
Okay. Questions or comments from council?
Excuse me, Kevin here. So, Marianne, I guess I would wonder if we did not, well, let me back up. So the 10% was given to us. The increase was presented to us, and yes, we are passing that along. The extra 2%, we would be generating that ourselves and then passing it on or forwarding that on to residents. But I would wonder in that council could still charge Environmental Commission to do the work and do the education, and perhaps consider, what expenses might be generated, from those efforts. I mean, if we did the 2%, we would eventually get $7,000 or thereabouts the first year. So that's perhaps our ceiling in what we would spend. But whereas we're not going to cut the budget and get to prosperity one way or the other, I'm just wondering whether we should take the opportunity to not have as much of a hand in increasing the cost. Yeah, 2%, it's not a lot in the grand scheme of things. But I think to Josue's point, from our perspective, it wouldn't change anything for the village. It would for the world if folks received this new information and then acted on it. So I think what I'm hearing is we're taking an opportunity to not do this thing that seems small, that would be an additional burden on the residents, but then also we can still do the work of educating folks. I don't know that we need to have this educational fund, if you will, to do the work. And I'm open to suggestions about how we can get there without having that extra money. But again, I think it was given the option of passing on what we have to pass on versus passing on something additional. I think we want to sort of reconsider passing on that additional.
Well, the money would go toward education materials, or in the case of the compost buckets. It would either, if we were going to do those things, it'd either have to come out of our general fund, or I don't know if we can get a grant to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Gavin or Carmen, anything?
Excuse me. I'm a little bit torn on this. As I said at the last meeting, I think given what we've had conversations about in the budget process, I think where I'm at is I'd like to have this be something that we consider along with other revenue and fee potential, things that we may do related to expenses. I think it's essentially, I think what we are trying to figure out is how many fees, how many taxes to have in the village. And it's tricky. This is a little itty bitty amount of money. The case of don't let your grandchildren be mad at you for filling up the ocean with plastic is a compelling one. And also we are having a hard time passing a school levy. And we're trying to figure out how are we as a community working across our taxing entities to have an appropriate sort of burden of cost on residents. So given that we're also talking about reciprocal tax, other things, I think if I come down today, I come down at, let's add it to the list of things let's look at, and let's see if we can come up with a package. And then ideally, I'd love to be doing something about this along with many other things.
All right, Carmen, do you want to add anything?
I think that we're fortunate enough to live in a community where people are incredibly aware. Some more than others, obviously, of the impact that the way they take care of their garbage impacts everything. And I think that we're kind of talking about the educational materials are already there. This is something that's accessible on the internet. Pilot programs, people that want to compost will, people that want to recycle will. For me, it's an argument of what can you make more important to somebody, you know what I mean? And I don't think that this 2%, you know, of course, it seems like a nominal amount, but are there other more effective ways to do it? So, you know, right now I think that as it is, I'd like to explore the other ways to do that besides passing on more cost, even if it is nominal.
Okay. So this is an emergency reading, so I'm going to open the public hearing. Any comments from citizens? Pat, come on up.
My name is Patricia Brown, and I live here in the village. And I had a few calls from people regarding the recycling, and I totally agree with Marianne of the need to do it. But I also know that it's very difficult to get people to read, to do the right thing. I think at this point, I would say, let's have a plan of how we're going to do it. And if we need to spend any money on it, then decide then, because there is no plan. I lived in Birch 3. I saw enormous amounts of garbage every single week. People do not recycle. People put in the recycle bag, they put them in black plastic bags. People do all kinds of things. Just because, I don't know, because they don't know, because they're busy, because they got families, I don't know. But we are not good at recycling, even though Yellow Springs has great values. We are down, down, down. There's many places all around us that do a heck of a better job. We are very bad at it. I don't know the solution, but I certainly would be willing to work with the Environmental Commission on doing some things. I compost. There are many people in Yellow Springs who compost. It's easy to compost if you have a little bit of land. We have tours for seeing people's gardens. We have tours to see solar. We could have tours to see how people compost. It doesn't cost a cent, and there are many people in Yellow Springs who do it simply and cheaply. Some of them do it more expensively, but there are ways for compost. And I think her idea of putting buckets out and taking to Agraria, they talked about that before. That's another possibility. But I don't think at this point in time, we should be putting a price on it when we don't even know what we're doing. That was the comments that people called me and said, what are we paying for? What's the plan? I said, I don't think we have one yet. So that's my idea.
All right, thank you, Patricia. Any other comments? Okay, I'm going to close the public hearing, and I'll say, like Gavin, I'm torn. But I think my decision is going to be based on, kind of similar to what Pat said. I'd like to see more from the Environmental Commission, from the Climate Action and Sustainability Group, and revisit this next year, because I believe that we could add this on. You know, it's not something that like we can't do it for, you know, the next 5 years. And so that's going to influence my decision. But yeah, this is a tough one. And I definitely want us to continue the work. So with that, G, let's go ahead and call the roll.
Well, you need to just determine which ordinance you are calling roll on. You have two before you.
Oh, okay. Yeah, so how do we, okay, so what, I guess we make a motion for one of the,
Yes.
okay. All right, so I'll entertain a motion for option 1.
So moved.
Okay, let's go ahead and call the roll.
All right. DeBoer Leonard,
Yes.
Brown,
Yes.
McQueen,
No.
Stokes,
Yes.
Tausch.
Yes.
Okay, so you will be then calling a vote on ordinance which lists option 1, which does not include a 2% education fee. So do you want me to call the roll on that ordinance?
Sure.
Okay, so, sorry. So I need a motion on that particular ordinance.
Okay, can I get a motion?
I move.
Second.
Thank you very much.
Okay, we'll call
Moore
it.
Leonard,
Yeah.
Brown. Yes. Stokes,
Yes.
McQueen.
Now, what are we voting on?
Just say yes.
This time it'll be extra confusing.
We're voting on the second, on
You are
option.
voting on an ordinance which does not include an education fee. Because the motion
Didn't we just
failed.
vote
The
on it?
motion- The motion passed to bring that ordinance forward. That is the ordinance you are now voting on. It does not include the education fee.
It does not.
So the first vote was, we voted to vote on option 1
Oh,
as opposed to option 2. So we've moved option 1 forward. It's here on the table.
okay.
Now we need to pass that.
no.
Stokes, did I call you yet?
Well, I can say yes again.
Okay. Ouch.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay. Next up is the second reading of 2022-38 by title only, please.
This is repealing and replacing Chapter 238, Treasurer.
Can I get a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Okay. So this is the second reading. I'm going to open the public hearing. We talked about this last time. This is updating our treasurer's roles. Any questions or comments from council? Questions or comments from citizens? All right, I'm going to close the public hearing, and Judy, let's go ahead and call the roll.
Yes, Brown. Stokes.
Yes.
DeVore Leonard.
Yes.
McQueen.
Yes.
Ouch.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, next up is the first reading of 2022-39, which we can also do by title only.
This is repealing and replacing Chapter 860, Solicitors and Itinerant Vendors.
All right, can I get a motion?
So moved.
Second.
All right, Josue?
Thank you, Brian. So this is a follow-up to, council wanted to see the vendor registration move forward. So this is the recommended language that requires vendors, itinerant vendors and door-to-door sales folks to register for a permit. What this allows us to do is close a gap in the taxation compliance process. One of the challenges we had early in the year in getting numbers on taxes collected from vendors in town is that we provide an exemption from folks registering in town. So we don't have authority to go to RETA and say, audit these vendors, and so we know what taxes are being paid. So this primarily closes that gap in information collection and taxation piece for the village to be able to transmit information to RETA to ensure that those vendors in the community are registered with RETA for any net profit taxes and that there's follow through. Now, this doesn't specifically address how much taxes they pay. That's a separate matter, and that's subject to individual filings and what sales are generated or net profits generated from those activities. But for us, what it does, it gets us a list of registered vendors that we can pass along to RETA. One of the things that we addressed in the previous meeting was looking at getting the individual contractors, particularly the home improvements, the plumbers, the electrician, and all those other folks, setting up a registration process for those contractors, similar to what Fairborn, Dayton, and other communities do. This ordinance does not address those other contractors. We are planning to address those contractors through separate legislation. This looks at itinerant vendors and solicitation vendors.
Okay. The other thing I'll emphasize, and Gavin was part of this meeting, is that when we spoke with RETA, they indicated that when they have these folks registered, they can send them information about their tax obligations and let them know about net profit tax as well as income tax. I know one thing that came up, and actually, I guess, one thing that came up was, the fact that without that information, it's hard for RETA really to do anything, and folks might not realize what those obligations are. There was a comment from an email that we got about, I had mentioned closing another loophole, which is the idea that for some reason in our current statute, it indicates that if you make your own goods, that you should not be taxed. I think the challenge with that is if you're selling tie-dyes, you can allege that you're making those tie-dyes. The other thing I will indicate is I've had a lot of folks, business owners, who have talked about the fact that there's a unfair competition aspect. I guess a few folks have space to rent to vendors, but a lot of people are supporting their own brick and mortars and are selling the same kinds of goods. At the end of the day, for me, this is about if you're supposed to pay the tax, then you should, and if you don't have a tax obligation, then you won't have a tax obligation. This is a first reading, so we don't need to go in depth, but if there are any questions or comments, yeah, Marianne?
Yeah, where it says licensure, license issuance and fee, and then it says something about 30 days. I was unclear. Does that mean that someone has to come in and get a license every 30 days?
Yes, that's currently what it means. And that's specifically designed for the door-to-door sales folks. But we either apply, and this legislation we apply to everyone, and that's something that we could reconsider.
So as it's currently written, if someone, let's say someone is at Nipper, they have every month they would have to come in, get a license, and pay $25.
Correct.
No, it seems unnecessary to me.
I would agree with that. If there's a case to be made, I'm open to hearing it, but if somebody's here all the time, if they can pay, register once, that seems like it could be sufficient.
Okay, anything else?
What was the language about a regular vendor? Am I getting some other ordinance?
That was the busking.
Okay.
Oh, also another question. What about street fair vendors at street fair?
They would fall under this requirement.
So they will all have to come in, they would all have
Correct.
to come in and get a license.
Okay. Anything else?
Can I just ask a question? Was there a background on where this is just like trying to kind of clean up things, or was there, you made reference, I'm just wondering if, like we talked about on the busking stuff, was there like what led to looking into this?
Getting information on what vendors are in town and what taxes are being collected on those vendors. So
Okay.
without knowing what the name of those businesses are, what their operating status is, we couldn't get tax information from them.
Okay, thank you.
Yep, Jessica.
Jessica Thomas, Yellow Springs News. Do you have I guess this is a question for Josue, do you have an estimation of how many vendors in town this would affect, not including street fair vendors?
We do not have a census of the vendors that are setting up in the non-brick and mortar places.
Okay. All right, so my sense is that maybe we need to address the
30 days.
30 days. Maybe we make an exception for street fair. I'm not sure. And Carmen?
Assess how many people are considered transient or itinerant vendors.
Okay.
And also, why isn't this taken care of with okay, so what can Rita do? Just call the state, or how is this going to be enforceable except for us collecting a fee every 30 days? You know what I mean?
Right.
As a transient vendor's license, you have a license to vend in the state.
Mm-hmm.
And you get that, and you pay the state.
Right.
Whatever your obligation is. So I don't understand. I guess I'm having a hard time understanding where this is going to be necessary for us, except for maybe collecting, a fee from people. Because I don't know, like, aside from, if it were to be for street fair vendors, of course, that would generate a lot of revenue. But if it's for the 5 to 6 people that I can think of off the top of my head that are here in any given weekend, I just, I don't know.
Yeah, and I think the two things we know, but we actually do have this meeting that Josue mentioned tomorrow. We know that one, Rita will send information to those folks about their obligations, and two, that's the way to follow up on whether they're paying taxes. But we'll check and see. We can ask that question again. Okay, something else, Gavin?
No, sorry.
Okay, great. All right, we'll be bringing this back for a second reading.
Yes.
So, okay. And now we're going to move into the emergency reading of 2022-40, which, Judy, we can do by title only.
All right, this is the 2022 fourth quarter supplemental appropriation and declaring an emergency for the Village of Yellow Springs, Ohio.
Can I get a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Okay.
All right, this is mostly good stuff, all good stuff. We need to add money to our expense budget for really good reasons. The retainer fee, we anticipate higher expense there because our retainer fee is on a 3% retainer fee model. So more collections, more fee. So we are exceeding the budgeted retainer fee. So we need to add that. That's good news because we're collecting more revenue than we initially budgeted. So we already collected $2 million for the year. So we need to add an additional $20,000 to the expense budget. On the public safety and community outreach, Florence, who I think it's online, did a great job at securing a generous grant of $4,400 to support the purchase of equipment, material, and provide other assistance for our homelessness population. And we've got some great news that Paige shared with me today, that of 4 homeless individuals in town, we found both short-term and long-term housing placement for those folks. So it's really good timing. My fingers were freezing on Saturday, and I was indoors. So, yes. So Florence, thank you. So that $4,400 goes towards that. Electric fund, we need some additional wages, money for wages and overtime. I think you guys have heard of the numerous power outages we had throughout the year. That's contributed to overtime, and so we need to make sure that we're properly funded in that department for the remainder of the year. We expect some weather events to come through. We had a little flurries over the last week and a half or so, but we expect more of that activity, and we just have to be prepared for the rest of the year. Another good news is our solid waste contract. We've had more sales, and so we have more expenses. So we anticipate have a positive net income in our solid waste this year. This is necessary. It's necessary to add an additional $46,000 to meet our our expenses for the year, and that covers it.
Okay, so since this is an emergency, I'm going to open the public hearing. And Marianne, did you have a question?
Yeah, on the money that we're paying to Rita, it seems like we've taken in about $85,000 more than anticipated. So it's hard for me to understand why we would have to pay an extra $20,000 to Rita.
Yeah, so that $2,034,000 is for collections through November. So we anticipate another collection of Rita for December to range between $150,000 to $200,000. And the fee that is going to be due on that is a percentage fee. So we had budgeted a retainer fee based on $1.9 million in collection. We've exceeded that, so we already exceeded our retainer fee.
Okay, so but whatever we pay Rita will be the 3%.
Correct.
Okay.
Yep. Any other questions? Gavin?
Yeah, so the electric operating fund, wages and overtime. So I guess I'm hoping this is kind of like what we were just talking about in the budget meeting before this, but just is this normal? Is this the reason that there would be some value in hiring someone so that we don't have these kinds of one-time expenses?
Emergencies are normal, overtime are normal. I think this year, would you say we had a unexpected overtime, like we had 2 village-wide power outages, 3 of them, which were out of our control. They were happening off-site, but we still had staff available and come in because we need to do our troubleshooting. Anything else that sticks out for you, Johnny?
In order to answer the question, we basically guessed at what we thought it was going to take, and we guessed low. Power outages, I mean, we can't predict them, but the main three were out of our control. It was village-wide. We had to actually come back in, and then we had some added costs to that because we had to work overtime in the switch station due to the fact that the regulators were affected due to the power outages.
Does that answer your question, Gavin?
I think so. So did we budget for this? Like, it sounds like we under budgeted. We maybe, is this something we've adjusted for next year? Is this something that
We will be adjusting it.
Yeah, one of the things that we do trending. So how we doing on these expense accounts, and so we budget based on how we're trending. So we don't.
One thing that I can say though, Gavin, and sorry to interrupt Josue, we just now this year started keeping track of overtime completely separate. So as of 22, all of my departments' overtime is completely separated. It will know whether they come in for water, whether they come in for electric, whereas all the years before, if they come in for an electric outage, 30% of it got charged to water. If they come in for a water main break, 70% of that water main break was paid by electric. So we have completely separated it to where we know what it costs for overtime for water, what it costs for overtime for the plants, sewer, electric. So these will be good numbers for next year.
Yeah. To add to that piece, a lot of that accounting discrepancy was due to how the distribution of an individual's pay was. And so in the past, it was just allocated to whatever that employee allocation. Now the team is keeping track of what hours are being devoted for an emergency to a different department. And so you can have an employee from one department get billed to a different department based on a service ticket or an emergency.
So when the electric guys are plowing snow, the electric is not paying them, streets is paying them. And vice versa.
Great, thank you.
Okay. Any other questions or comments from council? Any questions or comments from citizens? Okay, I'm going to close the public hearing, and Judy, let's go ahead and call the roll.
Yes, Brown.
Yes.
McQueen.
Yes.
DeVore Leonard.
Yes.
Stokes.
Yes.
Ouch.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, next up is Resolution 2022-67. Judy, we can read that in by title only.
This is authorizing the village manager to execute a license agreement with Massey's Creek Ventures LLC for right-of-way improvements adjacent to 108 Cliff Street.
All right, can I get a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Okay. I'm going to recuse myself on this one. So Kevin, you've got the gavel.
Alrighty.
And I am recusing myself at the advice of the solicitor that I might have a conflict of interest.
And this is the first reading. Oh, it's a resolution, so there's just one reading.
One reading.
Yes, obviously, I didn't know I was going to be taking over the meeting.
I'm sorry, Kevin.
That's okay. So, Judy, you read that by title only, I presume? If not, just go ahead. Let's go ahead and introduce the resolution again.
Okay, this is authorizing the village manager to execute a license agreement with Massey's Creek Ventures LLC for right-of-way improvements adjacent to 108 Cliff Street.
Okay. So, Josue, I think you have the lead on this.
Yes, I got a memo in the packet, and I just want to reiterate or highlight what the project is. This project went through a lengthy process with the Planning Commission and went through several iterations. Planning Commission approved the plan as it's outlined in the Planning Commission minutes. One of those conditions or elements of the plan is that they would use the public space that's adjacent to their property to create key access features. One of them is stairs, another it's a ADA ramp, bicycle parking, and also to provide access for public restrooms, all amenities that the village values and needs. And so what this license agreement does, it authorizes what has been approved and recommended by Planning Commission. From a values perspective, this is a great exchange for the amenities that are going to be created in the space. From an economic development perspective, this is a great project that's going to bring several different startup businesses and businesses that are looking to expand into the lumber company that for a long time was underutilized from a business use perspective. So it helps enable that economic activity while also bringing amenities that the village has asked for, such as public restrooms.
Okay, great. So can you talk about why this is a license agreement as opposed to a zoning change or some other approach?
Yes, the license agreement is a sort of well, it's an easy way to negotiate the use of space for an exchange, in this case, for the exchange of the amenities in the public restroom without the village giving up rights to the property. So unlike an easement or a perpetual easement, we're not giving the entitlements of this land to another party. That ownership remains with the village while the village gets indemnification and it doesn't have maintenance responsibility. We're putting the liability and the cost of maintaining that space on Massey's Creek and the lumber company for that space. So it's a way to negotiate a use of the space without the village giving up its land. Mm-hmm. Did I miss anything there, Amy? There's maybe a legal definition there.
Absolutely. Thank you. Hi, good evening.
Mm-hmm.
So no, everything you said was exactly accurate. The license agreement will live with Massey's Creek or any business entity that might succeed them as this business and this operation. But if it was to close or transfer property ownership, the license agreement then at that point ends, and the village, of course, still retains the property. Also wanted to make a comment. The version that's in your packet is going to be tweaked slightly based on a conversation I had today with their attorney. We're going to add some language about default for the public restrooms that the village manager is talking about. We're going to put a date in there as to when those restrooms should be installed and then open and maintained, and make it a specific term of default if they do not maintain the restrooms. So we're still discussing the date. We briefly talked earlier today about June of 2023. They got back to me this evening concerned that with issues with contractors, that might be a little overly ambitious, and they'd be looking to push that date back a little farther into 23, but there will be a date certain in there.
Okay.
In that clause is there to protect the village should the owners of the property default on their plan, then the license agreement is terminated.
Mm-hmm. So do we need to have some actual language proposed before we pass the resolution?
I have the language that I've agreed, that the Matthews Creek attorney and I have agreed to. If you'd like me to read it into the record, I can.
Yes, please.
We're going to add to section 3 of that license agreement. At the end of it, we're going to include the following language. If licensee fails to provide or maintain public restrooms on licensee's property open for use by the general public by, the date will be determined sometime probably fall of 2023. This will be considered default as a material term of this agreement. Licensor may notice licensee of this default and give licensee 30 days to cure. If licensee fails to cure the default, licensor may terminate this agreement at that time. Other than that, it'll read exactly as it is in your packet.
Okay, great. Thank you. Council, any questions or comments?
Sounds fine to me.
Yeah, not.
Okay. I do see that we've got Patrick Lake on Zoom. Patrick, did you want to come on and say anything?
I think you guys have covered it accurately. It's good to hear you from y'all. If you guys have any questions for me, I'm more than happy to answer.
All right, thank you, Patrick. Once again, council. All right, well, I think we've checked all the bases. So can I will entertain a motion for, too soon?
We've got the motion.
Okay.
You're ready to go.
So, but with the changes in the language, how do we address that?
It's been read into the record, and the resolution on the face just says that it will, it'll be as is shown on Exhibit 1, because that's been read into the record, because that's the version that will be signed. There's no reason to take another motion.
Okay, well, Judy, let's call the roll.
All right, Brown. Yes. DeVore Leonard.
Yes.
Stokes.
Yes.
Thank you.
All right, the resolution is passed, and we will welcome our colleagues back to the dais.
Thank you, council.
All right, thank you very much. And we can read in Resolution 2022-68 by title only.
All right, this is approving check signing privileges for West Banco Bank general checking and guarantee deposits.
Can I get a motion?
So moved.
Second.
All right. So, well, this is basically bringing Amy on, right?
Yes, she's on, and she needs access to all of her bank accounts and signing checks and all that good stuff, which I'm eager to have her do.
I can only imagine, yes. All right. So, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Okay. Last piece of legislation is Resolution 2022-69, which we can also do by title only.
This is authorizing the village manager to enter into a contract with JNT Excavating LLC for replacement of 2-inch galvanized water lines in the village of Yellow Springs.
All right. Can I get a motion?
I move.
Second.
Okay.
Thank you, Brian. Yeah, I want to start off by thanking Johnny for all his work and on this project. You know, we were able to secure a no match funds to replace a lot of our galvanized lines, lead lines, and Johnny's been spearheading the design of this work. And there's some really good news, which I won't get ahead of you, Johnny. I think it's worth sharing that we've. The way that Johnny and the team has engineered the project, we actually came in under the 1.2 million, so it'll create an opportunity elsewhere. We were really concerned about our purchasing power in this economic environment because everything was more expensive. So Johnny's done a great job to re-engineer this project.
Well, let me tell you, it's not me, it's my team. I tasked the water department, Ben, Dustin, Jeff, and Austin at the time, now it's Lane. They went out, they spent probably 2 months trying to find stuff because we don't have it on prints. And we had a list of 12 streets. We submitted 6 because that's the max we had. But after the team did their due diligence, they found valves that they put back in the 40s and 50s that have never been used, and they're still in good shape. They covered them with electric blankets and buried them. We found them. I don't know how, but we found them. They was able to submit the drawings. They GIS'd all the locations. They marked all the curb stops. The engineering did not cost as much. Submitted the engineering, went out for bid. We actually switched to ductile iron, or from ductile iron to C900 for material, which is going from ductile to a plastic. And the engineering budget was about 1.1 million. We was really scared with that number. It actually come in at $674,000. So what the engineer and myself did, we wrote an email to the state. The state agreed to allow us to add 2 more streets to take us up to the $1.2 million. So we was able to, by staff, be able to secure more streets. So now we're at 8 of 12 streets, and hopefully when we get that done, we may even be able to include the 9th. We've got it on the list, but we got to wait for the engineer. We're able to use the same contractor and just use his already priced information. The contractor that bid on the job has not done work in the village since 2015. They are the contractor that did the Corey Street, the Xenia Avenue, which was at that time GM Pipeline, and they are now J&T. So the work is great. We've had good times working with them in the past, and we was able to get some good bid numbers. We have another one for King Street coming in tomorrow that will be coming back as well.
So
excellent.
what you're approving tonight is to engage this company contract for the 1.2 million.
And this is related to that obligation for by 2024, is that right?
Correct.
Okay.
This is for the House Bill 168.
Yep, excellent.
And by 2024, we don't have to have fixed everything. We just need to have
We had to
identified.
be under contract, and they're planning on starting in January.
Okay,
So we will probably be done by 2024.
that would be great.
Great.
So
Okay. Any other questions or comments? All right. Thank you, Johnny. And we appreciate the team as well. All right. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Okay. So citizen concerns, this is the time on the agenda where we will entertain any comments about any items that are not on the agenda, up to 3 minutes. Looks like Mitzi has a citizen concern.
Hello, my name's Mitzi Miller. I'd like to thank the village involvement in educational campaign and investigation and notification to property owners on sidewalk issues. I also want to thank Johnny and his crew for cleaning up our ADA ramps. That's made a huge difference for accessibility for people who are disabled. Also, the volunteers and surveys done by the Community Action Group for Safe Sidewalks and the Active Transportation Committee's involvement. We have changed attitudes and made our village safer for all pedestrian travel. Next spring, this volunteer group will be working on Corey Street and West South College to remove clumps of grass between concrete and edge to increase the width of sidewalks so those individuals with disabilities, seniors, individuals using mobility devices, and visually impaired and the blind have safe travel routes to use in our village. The current survey list of sidewalks and formal complaints dated on November 7, 2022 has been reduced to 65 and now to 40 properties. Please remember this survey was of the whole village and that it started with 150 properties during the summer. When looking at changes, our sidewalk ordinance and how you will prioritize complaints, you need to closely examine how these changes will impact those individuals who are disabled and our seniors. Sidewalks that are narrow because of vegetation growth over the edges, those covered with debris, and those having tree height issues may not pose a risk to an able-bodied pedestrian, but it definitely restricts passage for wheelchairs, scooters, walkers, electric wheelchairs, seniors, and those visually impaired and blind. Able people would just move around obstacles and continue walking. A disabled individual using a mobility device going around obstacles would be going in the grass and possibly falling or tripping or getting stuck. I encourage you not to move backwards and continue to make our village safe for all our pedestrians and continuing to develop safe routes for travel for our children.
All right, thanks, Mitzi. And even though this looks like it's on the agenda, actually what we're going to talk about under old business is a bit different. So that's why I allowed that comment. Any other citizen concerns? Okay, then we're going to move into,
Just seeing if anybody else had anything to say.
All right, very polite.
Riley Dixon. I am a member of the Environmental Commission. I have 3 minutes, right? Okay. So, so this is coming out of a conversation we had at the previous Environmental Commission meeting earlier this month. I would like to float a no idling ordinance. Obviously, I can't float a law to be written tonight, but I'd like to provide a little context for where the conversation came out of. Maybe by giving some general stats. Greenhouse gas emissions from transportation ultimately account for 27% of total US greenhouse gas emissions. And then if we take the pie of transportation and we divvy that up, we have light duty vehicles accounting for 57% of transportation greenhouse gas emissions. This is coming out of the EPA from 2020. If you do the math, that's about 15% of light vehicle emissions amounting to the 15% of the total greenhouse gas emissions from the US come from light vehicle emissions, right? So what I would like to float, having seen so many vehicles downtown, around the schools, around Ellis Pond, around around the various publicly owned parking lots. I would like there to be a no idling ordinance to enforce how long a vehicle can have their engine on. We see this a similar ordinance in various municipalities on college campuses around the US or throughout the US and also around the world. I think it's time the US caught up. I think it's time Yellow Springs caught up. So I think the Environmental Commission will bring something to council here in the next couple of months, but I kind of wanted to publicly bring this, before you all right now. I know there are going to be commission reports here coming soon, but, as a citizen, I feel like I could do it better in this capacity. There's my time. Anyway, there are a number of restrictions that I'd like to run by you all, but ultimately, I don't want to see vehicles idling for more than 2 or 3 minutes. And I also don't want to encourage more punitive policing in the village. I talked to Chief Burge about this. She seemed amenable to something like this. I'd be happy to talk to you all more, and I suspect I will.
All right, thanks, Riley.
So,
okay. Sure, Patricia, come on up.
I just, I totally agree with the no idling, but I just wanted to make people aware. There are many, many, many people in Yellow Springs who have Prius. You can idle them and no emissions come out. So just be aware of that as you make this rule, that you can idle your engine and nothing comes out in a Prius.
Okay. All right. Any other citizen concerns? Okay, so we are going to move into special reports, and we've got our folks that are going to talk to us about our utilities. So welcome to our meeting.
Thank you. I think, Josue, are you running the slides? Or?
Yes, well,
Well, that's fine. Okay.
All right, so welcome.
Yeah, well, we can find the slides. While we're getting the slides up, I do want to mention I do have my associate, Scott Wiggin, here tonight. Scott's kind of the guy behind all the numbers, so if the numbers don't add up on some of the tables,
all right,
we'll bring it up with him.
And I'm not sure if everyone's met Mr. Courtney, but yeah, great to have you here.
Yeah. And I do need to apologize. We started this process, Johnny, about 1.5 years or so ago. COVID got a little bit in the way. And then we started up again earlier this year. And unfortunately, lumbar fusion surgery got in the way. And so still under recovery, unfortunately, from that. But I'll do my best to make it through there standing. So you basically have retained us to take a look at all 3 of your utility rates, electric, water, and sewer rates. And so I guess we'll just start in with the electric and try to get you caught back up on your schedule a little bit. So the scope of services, and you're going to see this similar slide in all 3 of the presentations, basically break into these steps. And the first is what we call data acquisition and verification. And follow that up with what we call a projected revenue requirement analysis. And I'll get on more detail on these in the later slides. We also included a rate review in the proposal, and we really kind of put that on hold for right now to present the results to you to kind of get some feedback. So, and then again, we're here tonight to present you what we do have completed. So on the data acquisition and verification, we basically submit a data request, and basically looking for billing statistics, operational data, financial reports. And things are starting to look a lot better on the financial side, by the way. So obviously we do some analysis of that. We try to verify the accuracy of that data. And then because we're going to be using that obviously to project things going forward. So the next step then is to project revenue requirements, or as I usually say, what it costs to operate and maintain, in this case, the electric utility here in Yellow Springs. We first do that by projecting energy sales, because that's going to drive your single largest cost, and that's the next item, power supply requirements. So once we've projected energy sales, power supply requirements and costs, we can then project revenues at current rates. I'm sure you're all aware you have a power cost adjustment that it changes every month based on changes in your power supply costs. And so we obviously need to know that before we can do step 3. The next step then is to project the revenue requirements and then compare those revenue requirements to the revenue at current rates to determine what adjustment might be needed. So with regard to energy sales, we separate those out by rate class or customer class, and we try to normalize historical anomalies in the data. Obviously we have some seasonal effects on occasion, mostly in water and wastewater, but a little bit in the electric, and then project sales gross. And so for purposes of the analysis, to be conservative, we've assumed a 0 growth rate for all 3 rate classes, residential, commercial, and large power. And you can see what the projected energy sales are there. The thing to point out here is your total energy sales are just under 30 million kilowatt hours a year, and residential represents just a little over half of that. So you're predominantly, as you all know, predominantly a residential community for the most part. So next step then is to project power supply requirements and costs. We take those projected energy sales that you just saw and we adjust those for losses. Because you don't sell every kilowatt hour that comes into the system. There are losses in transformers, there's losses in wire. There's also losses associated with services that are unbilled. And so that's what kind of makes up that, loss figure. Now, we don't actually do the projection of power supply costs ourselves. As some of you may know, you've got a portfolio of resources through your relationship with AMP. And they actually do that projection for us. So we kind of lean to them when it comes to doing the projection of power supply costs. So they supply us their projections. We then apply it to our projections of your energy requirements. And you can see on this slide here for the next, what we're showing for 23 through 26, kilowatt hour requirements are just over 36 million. And you can see the dollar amounts are fairly close. AMP's actually projecting a slight reduction out in 2026 as compared to 2025. So a little over 9 cents a kilowatt hour. And by the way, if you have questions, I guess if you feel free to answer, interrupt me if you'd like. So once we've done that, we can project revenues at current rates. And you can see what we're projecting for the average residential rates. Now these would be at the 2022 power supply cost, which you didn't see on the prior slide, but a power cost adder just under 2 cents a kilowatt hour. So residential is a little less than 16 cents, commercial roughly 14, and industrial or large power about 11. So we take those average revenues, we apply those to the kilowatt hours for each class to come up with overall projected revenues. And you can see we're projecting for 2022 anyway, this year, at about $4.1 million. Now, the next step then is to project revenue requirements. And we actually really have 2 methodologies that we would typically take a look at for projecting revenue requirements. One is what we call a cash basis. The other is what we call a rate of return, or some call it a utility basis. Under the cash basis, what we basically are looking at is what your cash requirements are. So we're including all your operating expenses, we're including all of your debt, both principal and interest, and we're including capital outlay as a part of that cash expenditure. What we don't include, though, is things like depreciation, non-cash expenses. Under a rate of return or utility basis, which is typically what's used for, investor-owned utilities at state commissions, for example, they would not include capital outlay as a part of the revenue requirement, but they would include depreciation and a return on that investment. So just a little bit different approach. They give you different answers. We typically use a cash basis for municipalities because you've got to meet cash. And, if we do both, if we did the rate of return or utility basis and it said, well, you could justify a higher rate increase, Well, sometimes people have a problem with that because that would cause you to accumulate cash. On the reverse side, if that showed that you had a lower revenue requirement, well, then eventually you'd run out of cash. So we typically use a cash basis for municipalities. We try to normalize the historical data. And again, we've kind of walked through the power supply cost, but we did look at your 22 budget for the most part. Try to anticipate changes in operations. And by the way, we've shared a lot of the detail with Johnny and Josue. They've kind of walked through the model with us. So included inflation, 3% per year, allowance for capital improvements, and then we credit against all those expenses miscellaneous income. So I apologize for the size of the numbers on this slide, but we try to fit it all in for you. But you can see, yeah, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Kevin Stokes here, sorry. Now, the inflation number that you used on the previous slide, is that just a utility-related inflation number, or are we talking about anything close to consumer inflation?
Well, it actually, first off, on the power supply, I need to kind of correct. The power supply was actually provided by AMP. Mm-hmm. So, if we go back to the earlier slide, these numbers here, are actually provided by AMP. So anything that would affect your power supply related costs isn't necessarily 3%. It's what they've got built into their projections of costs. So all the other items, we basically are looking at 3%. Now, keep in mind, we've kind of captured already the high inflation we've seen in 2022. That's already kind of built into the budget numbers. So we're talking about going on beyond that. Gotcha. We've seen inflation kind of returning back to, hopefully, to a more normal
level. Great. Yeah. Thank you. Appreciate that.
Yeah. So you can see what the breakdown. Obviously, purchase power is the single largest cost that you've got, as you can see there. Overall revenue requirements in 2023 is about 4.2 million, going out to a little over 4.3 million, out by 2026. So the last step then is to compare those projected revenues to the revenue requirements, and you can see on this slide we're showing revenue requirements in the first column, revenue at current rates in the second column, the third then being the difference. And if we see a positive number, that means that your revenue requirements is actually exceeding your projected revenues, means you have a shortfall. And you can see what we're showing out through 2026 is about a 6% shortfall based on the assumptions in the model. So, yeah, I'm sorry.
Can you go back one slide real quick to the like the capital transfer that's in the 2023, is that in our current budget? The draft we've been looking at?
This one?
Yeah.
No, not yet. There's two items on here that are not in our budget, and that is the 120 transfer to capital and the other income, that 180. In 2020, we had budget revenue for sale of renewable energy credits. Council voted that down, so we are taking that off of next year's budget. So those two items are not on the 2023 budget yet. The 2020 is going to go in there, but the renewable energy credit is not. Okay. Unless council wants to indicate otherwise, and certainly want to be respectful of council's intentions down the road.
Yes.
So in conclusions, our projected revenues at current rates are not sufficient to meet the projected revenue requirement, and that the revenues would need to be increased by approximately 6% in order to meet the projected 2026 revenue requirements. So, yeah, go ahead.
Is it okay? So you have no projections in sales increases. Is that normal?
Well, we looked historically, and you've really not had any increases in sales.
Yeah. Okay.
And so, yeah, and then now keep in mind, Cresco, which is already here, is in those figures. So, yeah. But we don't normally include any additional sales unless there's something particular we know, something large that we know is coming. And right now, we're not aware of anything based on discussions with Josue and Johnny of any significant increases in sales that are coming down the road.
So I understand correctly that what we know is yet to come with Cresco is included?
So the Cresco is a current expansion. Those numbers would have been represented in the historical data. What this additional adding a growing facility is not factored in because they haven't broken construction on it yet. And as of today, it's still on hold because of other business activities they have going on. On the residential side, we couldn't add any growth because the growth that we have been planning since last year, it's not going to take place. So that's not being contemplated in this model because we know it's not happening.
Yeah.
Well, we have a potential housing development of 90 units that maybe will be completed within 4 years. If we had that increase, would that make much of a difference in terms of your projections and what we would need to increase? Or
yeah, it wouldn't have a significant impact because basically what makes up most of your cost is power supply costs, and you'll see that incremental cost, for any new load that you get. So the margin, so to speak, or what we call net margin, difference between revenue and power cost, really isn't that significant that it would sway the needle a whole lot. I mean, 6% might become 5% in year 4, for example, but you're not going to eliminate, the whole 6% with 90 new homes. No.
So residential development wouldn't make that much of a difference?
Not that much of, not if we're only talking 90 homes. Now, if we're talking about 900 homes, yeah, that could,
Okay.
yeah, that would be a significant change.
And then last question, the commercial costs being higher than residential cost and there being sort of 3 tiers, is that normal?
Pretty typical. We did a cost of service for you back in 2015, John, 15. And when we did that study, which kind of goes beyond what this study was designed to do, we actually allocate those revenue requirements to each class. So we allocate cost to residential, to serve commercial, to serve large power customers. And then we compare those class by class. And when you did the last rate adjustment, you made some changes to kind of move the revenue distribution towards that cost of service result. So yeah, it's not uncommon for commercial rates to be slightly higher than residential, and not uncommon for industrial rates to be slightly lower than residential. Yeah. I think I'm at the end of the electric. If there are other questions on the electric.
Well, I guess just one more thing to clarify. So the 90 versus 900 homes is specific to electric because of the cost of service as opposed to other utilities?
Primarily because your purchase power costs will also go up. As you get new customers, you have a big chunk. I'm going to probably say about 3/4 of your cost is power supply. So in round numbers. So you're going to have that increased cost to go along with it. So it's not like you make every dollar you get from a new residential customer goes to the bottom line, because incrementally you're going to have power costs associated with serving that. So.
And is that different from other utilities like water?
It's very different. Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. John, is it because we don't produce our power? We don't make
That's
our
correct.
power. We buy our power.
That's right. Yeah. You don't own, well, you do kind of through contracts with AMP, you kind of technically own some resources, but your power, you'll need more power supply as you get more load. Yeah. Beyond what you currently have.
Okay, last just dumb question. So you're saying that in order to make this line up, that it's we have to raise, when it says revenues would need to be increased by approximately 24% in order to meet the projected 2026 revenue requirements.
Actually, I think we're talking about electric.
Sorry, I'm on the next, it was 6%, whatever so whatever that number is, it's the same on each, so just so I know, as all these are coming, are you saying we would have to increase the rate by 6% now to meet 2026 requirements, or that we could increase by 6% in 2026? So just explain that piece.
Well, yeah, I appreciate the comment about the water and the wastewater, but unfortunately in the electric, we're actually looking at about a 5% increase next year. So you're really probably looking at a one-time increase to get you where you need to be. I mean, you could do some phase in, but given the nominal size, we're not talking about a significant amount. Our recommendation would be to try to, just do it as one step in the electric, unlike what we're going to talk about in water and wastewater a little bit, where I think you've got some room there. We're looking at bigger percentage increases, and you've got, they kind of ramp themselves up. So,
but just to be clear, if we do 5% this year, it's going to be 0.2 the next year. It's not 5 again, and then 6 again, and then 6 on top of that.
Very good point. Yeah, these are one-year snapshots. So you're looking at current revenue, revenue requirements in that year given current rates. So yeah, so it's the increase needed from current rates to get to where you need to be. Yeah, they're not cumulative.
Great.
And John, if I may add that the model here contemplates the sale of renewable energy credits to generate some
That's right.
additional revenue.
180,000 miscellaneous revenue includes the arbitrage, so to speak, yes. Yep. Any other questions on electric?
Well, I'll just say, I guess we need the numbers without the arbitrage.
It's a higher percentage.
Yeah, so I guess just.
Yeah, and we can pretty much say what it is. It's about 155, I think it was $155,000. So out of a $4 million revenue, it's about 0.4%. So.
Okay.
Yeah. Call it a 0.5% round number.
Okay, so I'm going to switch now to what presentation went next.
Okay.
Which one do you want, John?
Whichever one you pop up will do.
Our, sewer came up first, so let's do. It's gonna go all downhill from here.
Well, this will go a lot quicker because I'm not going to repeat all these slides for you and try to explain what's going on. Pretty much the same process. The scope of services is the same. The data acquisition is the same. Let me just get right to the sales. What we're projecting for sales for sewer, which by the way are tied pretty much to your water sales. So you bill sewage usage off of water usage. And you can see that we're looking at projected overall sales of 81 million gallons a year, and 68 million of that, well more than half, is residential. So even more predominantly residential when it comes to wastewater. Based on your current rates, this is what the average residential, commercial, and large power. We keep that large power class because that's the way the billing data comes out. That's the way it's classified. So, and you can see that they're all pretty close together. Residential about $14 a 1,000 gallon, commercial 13, and large power just slightly less. So we multiply that out times the usage, we end up at 1.1 million. In total revenue at current rates. Again, not going to belabor you with the cash basis versus the utility or rate of return basis. Pretty much the same methodology that we used in the electric for revenue requirements. And you can see here your single largest cost here is basically personal services. Wages, benefits are your single largest cost in the wastewater, followed by contractual, which I think, Johnny, you guys talked about a little bit earlier. So when we compare those revenues at current rates to the revenue requirement, you can see we're showing a shortfall this year of roughly 14%, which grows to about 24% by 2026. So as we talked before, I mean, we think here, well, let me just jump to the next slide. While we're looking at a 24% shortfall in 2026, we think you could probably phase this in over 4 years to get there. In other words, you don't need to jump 24% in 2023 necessarily, because of the phase-in. And this is primarily because a lot of your costs are just affected by inflation. Keep in mind, in your electric, by the way, you have a power cost adder. So when those power costs slightly move up and down, that adder adjusts to that. You don't have that in water, obviously, to index to any of your costs. So, yeah.
I seem to recall, and Brian, Judy, you might remember, that previous council, maybe about when we came on council, that we were supposed to be increasing our rates and didn't. I mean, that maybe you had come at that point, and the thing was we were supposed to be increasing them every year, and we didn't, I think, because of people complaining about the cost of living and the cost of, so it's not surprising in that case that we have this rather large jump.
Yeah, you, well, I was not involved in your water and wastewater rates. We did your last electric rates. And you did have some phase in there as well. You did $1 a year on the customer charge. And I believe those did get implemented, at least what's currently being charged. I can't speak to the water and wastewater rates necessarily because I wasn't involved with those back then. So.
Well, I'll just go ahead and ask it. This goes to the question I was going to ask about, like, when were these projections last done? So you're basically saying we knew this was coming, and then we did it because it was we were just trying to keep costs low and we were, okay.
Yes, and during my time, we've been intentional about looking for cost-saving opportunities. So in the sewer, we cut a lot of the infiltration and inflow. So we've cut the amount of water being treated at the wastewater treatment facility. So we haven't had any rate increases during the time that I've been here. There's been a lot of focus on cost-saving measures, but we were reached at this point where I've been reporting, since last year that we've exceeded all the cost-saving measures. We need to adjust our rates to be able to do some basic maintenance.
And I think it was even before you, Josue.
Yeah.
I think with Patty is when we had the study done. This is what we were supposed to do, and we didn't do it.
Yeah.
Oh, no, we did.
We didn't keep raising the rates.
We did it to 18, and then the study stopped. And then we were supposed to do another 3% on top of every year, and that's where it stopped.
Yeah. So there are two things that we're looking at for adjustment. One is the readiness for service charge that has remained the same since 2001, and what's changed has been the consumption charge.
Yeah, I know, yeah, you hadn't raised, well, the last ordinance, it was set in May of 15, but it may have been the same number prior to that. You don't see the numbers going back. So at least since 2015, you haven't changed the readiness to serve. And quite frankly, when you're looking at, how to recover these increases, that's something you really need to kind of focus on, because the readiness surcharge you're going to get regardless of, people reduce their usage. And your costs don't necessarily go down, at the same rate as what your rates are. So,
right.
So certainly that's what you want to consider.
When you talk about cost savings from finding, leaks and things like that, what are we talking about here? Like, can you give me any kind of a context of what percentage change? I mean, I'm just to be honest, from my perspective, it looks like, okay, we found some leaks, but it sounds like we just kicked the can. Or are you telling me it would be 48% if we hadn't found all the leaks?
On the sewer side, we reduced our volume by 30% of what we were treating. So on the water production side, we're losing about 50%. We had 50% water loss, then we detected significant leaks. And Johnny, what are we down to?
Water?
Yeah.
We're down to 32 or 33%.
Yeah. Yeah, so
it's 50. Significant.
It's significant.
It's not nothing. It would be
a
notably bigger number if we didn't find this stuff.
Oh, for sure. These numbers will be bigger. And I mean, to some extent, we were facing citation notices from the EPA on the amount of wastewater we were treating because we were exceeding our system.
And I also think it's good to know, the last time we did this study, Mary Ann, it was through RCAP. So we did the water and wastewater. The capital outlay for when that study was done was not a 10-year projection that I sent to John and Scott. So we're looking further ahead, and capital is driving some of this number.
Yeah.
Because we're trying to get ahead of it.
Excuse me, in an earlier slide, John, you even mentioned that the personnel costs or personal costs were the biggest contribution to the cost. And John, you suggested earlier if we could do a better job with our manpower,
right?
That would be, all of that would be better.
It could be better, yes.
Mm-hmm.
Where we're going to see a difference is we've made changes. Like last year, we went to adult press on the sewer plant.
Mm-hmm.
So we're actually saving costs, but we don't want to say we're saving until we get another year under our belt. So we're actually hoping to save $80,000 to $90,000. That's significant for hauling away waste. And we're also changing the process to help better that number as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we did calculate a payback period on the sludge press, which is at 2.5 years. So after that, we really see some significant savings from switching that technology.
Okay.
And another fact, and John mentioned this earlier, this is also driven by the water. That's how much we would know to bill. So when we're losing 32%.
Sir, you need to speak into a microphone.
Sorry. So when John referred to, this is also done by the water. So when we're losing 32% of the water, that's also 32% loss on this revenue here. So to go forward, we think a lot of it is in the meters. Hopefully by the end of December, we'll get good news on another grant that I applied for at OPWC to where we will have remote meters within 2023's budget to where we can start getting more of that revenue. I'm not going to tell you it's all there, but meters are 50 years old and they're past their life because there's only a 20-year lifespan on the meters. So hopefully by us catching some of the loss, we're going to help on the sewer side as well.
Yeah, okay, great, thank you.
Anything else on the sewer? I guess you can go ahead and switch it out.
All right.
At the end, do I?
Let's.
Okay, last but not least by any means, the water. And again, I'm going to slip through these first several slides and get to the sales numbers. And you can see actually you sell less water than you bill wastewater. But you do, again, you are predominantly residential, as you can see. Average revenues for water are slightly higher. You know, remember we're in the $13 range on the sewer. Here we're in the $15, and a half to $16 range on the average revenue. So, ironically, though, with the fewer sales but a slightly higher rate, the annual revenues come out almost identical, a little over $1.1 million. So, not by design, just the way it is. I'll slip through this and get to the expenses. And you can see again, just like in the wastewater, your single largest cost is still personal services. I would point out, though, you do have some significant expense in the debt side, especially on the treatment side, which is a fixed cost, which doesn't go away. But the good thing is if you get new customers, that debt doesn't go up because of those new customers. So that can help you out. That's where it kind of makes a difference on the water side, for example, than it does in the electric. So if we compare revenue requirements to revenue current rates, unfortunately, we're at almost double what we were in the wastewater with a shortfall, ranging from roughly 32% to roughly 41% by 2026. But again, I think, like the wastewater, I think you could spread this in, phase it in over a 4-year period. You don't need to jump all the way to where the 2026 numbers needs to be. So. Any questions?
Well, so I guess, and you already referenced it, but 90 new housing units, I mean, what does that do?
And we could actually run that number for you. Again, the difference in water is you don't have that one big, large cost like you do in electric, which is power cost. And so those revenues that come in, other than your incremental cost of treatment primarily, or some increase in maintenance, obviously O&M on those lines, but it's not going to be as significant as what you see with power costs. So.
Right. And we have a fixed cost, the debt service.
Yeah, fixed costs that don't go up, as a result of new customers. So yeah, we could certainly, I think we could run something if you wanted to see that.
Yep, I think that would be helpful. Okay, other questions?
I think I'm satisfied.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, John. We appreciate it.
Guess if I did have a question, it would be, what's next?
Well, there's a rate review that's pending, and John and Scott are available. They're a key player in the work and the AMP Association. So certainly anything that council needs, we can reach out to John and Scott for follow-up. But certainly the next step for us in terms of tangible actions is that we do need to do some rate adjustments across the board. We've been working hard. We've gotten money. We just talked about the 1.2 million that's going to replace water lines. That in the past, that would have been something that we needed to take money from our water treatment funds or water operating funds. We've got that 1.2 million. That's money that we're not taking out of the operating fund or borrowing against. So we're certainly working hard, but we still need to adjust rates.
All right.
Those two biggest cost drivers are the personnel and that debt service that's fixed cost. And we have a ton of capacity in our water plant. We can produce 1 million gallons.
So when are we talking about that?
That's we need to get that on the schedule.
So can we add it for a next agenda? I mean, it doesn't be the next one, but I guess let's stop kicking the can, I guess.
Yes, and the way that we normally schedule these is we have the presentation, then it's a discussion, and we talk through what are our rates that we can consider, and then we schedule the legislation for it.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And, excuse me, and I would just submit, I don't imagine that every single resident is watching this meeting right now. So I think, an educational push to explain, in bullet point form, all of this very helpful information that drives the decisions that will have to be made.
Absolutely. We'll start getting the messaging out, and I hope that Jessica covers this key discussion tonight. And
we're going to talk about it on December 7th.
Yes.
With that joint meeting.
Yeah.
Okay, anything else?
Thank you, John. Thank you, Scott.
Yeah, thank you, guys. All right, so we're going to move into the manager's reports.
All right, that is a tough presentation to follow. We're excited to have Amy on board. We've been working on a lot of budget items. We're prepping for the end of the year. And through that, we've also had some significant accomplishments throughout. There's great work being done on stormwater, other activities. So I'm open for questions on our manager's report.
Trying to generate a question to have Amy come up to the mic at her first meeting.
The other things that we'll be working on, we've got, Brian and I attended our Department of Transportation debrief meeting, and it was a hard meeting to sit through, primarily because we thought we had a really great proposal. We didn't score as well as we did, but we're going to start putting that grant application together for February deadline. I think that we've got a great project, the Yellow Springs Clifton Connector. So we'll be working on that. We're also looking at other grant opportunities. Johnny mentioned some that we'll be working towards.
Okay,
so I don't know if this is quite the right time, so tell me if not. But I'm just thinking about, like, in the manager's report, wondering, is that an appropriate time to get like some kind of monthly financial projections? Or I'm just thinking about in the budget process, I was caught a little by surprise where we were at this when we were once we got into the budget. And I wonder, I don't think maybe I've missed something. It doesn't seem like there's some kind of like regular, here's the revenues and expenses.
We do that. There is a quarterly process that we do that. When we were without finance director, that sort of put the regular reporting on hold. Then we discovered discrepancies that we needed to reconcile all of the books for the entire year, going back to January and having to do some of that work. We're still in that reconciling process. I know Amy's got a meeting on the 5th with a consultant that council approved an additional contract with our software solutions to do all that work. So we're reviewing every transaction because there's some that needed to be corrected, others need to be redone. On top of that, not to say how busy we've been, but we've also been under extreme scrutiny, special audit. I was here, the team internally, we did the audit, the regular annual audit, and then the special audit. So I think there's been some circumstances that haven't allowed the bandwidth for that. But typically we would have the quarterly financial reports.
Okay. Just for whatever it's worth, that's something I would really appreciate starting next year. And even if it's, frankly, if there's something that can be done monthly, it doesn't have to be, anyway, it'd be great to look at the templates. Maybe we could do that in finance committee meeting.
Right.
And so I think it would also help ensure everybody on council has some sense of where we are, that we don't get to the budget and we're like, whoa, what's going on? That we've got some sense. So I get it was a different year this year.
Yeah.
But if we can work together to make sure it doesn't happen next year, that'd be great.
Now, we can issue an expense report and just show you where expense accounts are, and that's mostly up to date. I don't know if you caught that that John made reference to how better our financials are, because we have made improvements to record expenses and all these other transactions. So
great.
Yeah, and I can say that, we got those quarterly in the past, probably, I think you came on right when,
it's a
we lost it.
anomaly.
Yeah.
Cool.
A small thing, but I'd also like an update, and I don't know if that's in the treasurer report or from the finance director, but on our cable revenues, I just want to see where that's at. I was reminded of that just when we updated the ordinance.
Yep, and those revenues have been booked, and so we're, last I checked, we're at 34,000, so we're meeting you're talking about cable franchise fees, right? Yes.
That's not bad. Okay. Anything else for our village manager? Okay, we got a couple old business items that I think we will address relatively quickly. Okay, so the first one on sidewalks. One of the things that I think there's been some confusion about in the community is that some of the efforts that have been made around addressing sidewalk issues are not village driven. And so I guess related to Judith's letter that was in the packet in particular, that is not activity that is being directed by our planning and zoning department. I think we probably need to talk a little bit about how that activity is best achieved. But the other thing that we addressed at the last meeting, but didn't really talk about concretely, is Denise kind of proposed whether council wants to look at a change in policy around enforcement and suggesting that would require a compliance officer, or if we sort of go with the process that we've been doing. So I guess I want some clarity from council. Is there interest in talking about a change in policy that involves more enforcement than what's happening right now?
Brian, before I answer, I guess is one of the major changes moving away from a complaint-driven format?
That's part of it, but it's also, I guess, at what level are we going to enforce? All right. So, for example, Josue has told me that grass in the cracks is not something that we're going to
prioritize. And
we're not going to prioritize.
And I can jump in. We've have more complaints than we're designed to handle. With all the other economic development activities or planning and zoning activities, we don't have the capacity in our structure. So what Brian's getting at in one of the enforcement mechanisms is, is council interested in increasing enforcement? And by that, do we hire an inspector that's just going to walk down streets and catch all those violations and just outright issue violations? So that's one way to get at all the challenges that have been raised as complaints, and some, because when you've got someone on staff, well, they got to perform, and that means you got to find some of these citations. What we are changing internally are prioritization of complaints. There are complaints like we've sent 2 letters for flowers hanging in Sidewalk. We're going to not prioritize things like that, but we're also not going to issue multiple letters for a notice of violation. We're going to issue the first letter, and that second notice is going straight to a citation. So, in fact, our ordinance doesn't require all those notices. We are we're taking a kindness approach and giving as much notice as we can. But we're going to eliminate one additional letter, so it'll be one notice and then the citation. In that process, we're also prioritizing things that are significant risk to mobility. What are those? Those are significant encroachments in the public space, so things like grass growing in the cracks of the sidewalks. Those are not going to be prioritized. Things that might obstruct the sidewalk less than 20% might not get the same level of attention as something that's greater than 20% obstruction.
So I guess, go ahead, Marianne.
So, yeah, Judy had said something in an email that I wasn't totally sure what she meant. She said that council should affirm staff's ability to determine which violations to pursue. Oh, okay. Actually, now I guess I get it. Some email you said. So Josue, are you saying that you are proposing that staff, whomever it is, determines what violations make something unsafe and or unpassable? Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
And then it's those violations that would be targeted.
Correct. Now, currently, prior to this internal change administratively, we were investigating every complaint, and we will go out and we'll find numerous things, some that didn't rise to the level of a risk of tripping hazard or obstruction of sidewalk, but we still followed up and issued notices of violation. Now, based on how the complaint comes in, there's going to be an administrative review internally to whether to investigate that complaint. There's some complaints that we get that they may not have supporting evidence or pictures or enough description to indicate that there's a high risk of trip or obstruction of the sidewalk. So those might not get investigated. Only significant risk factor or complaints with significant risk factors will get investigated.
So just following up regarding your question, I don't support hiring additional staff to go out and find people to cite. I do appreciate the work that's been done by this, that Mitzi in particular has raised, and I do think that we need to continue to look at this as a cultural shift, and cultural shifts take time. So I do think that some entity of the village government should be regularly, maybe at the beginning of the year, putting something out, this is what we expect. So, I mean, and continuing to do that so that people know, okay, it's not okay to just not do anything and let it. But I also don't want to be hiring extra staff to go around and measuring that.
Okay.
I agree with what Marianne has said, and Josue, I would just ask, how much of the changes are simply adhering to current ordinance?
I would say that all the changes adhere to the ordinance. We're a bit generous in our notification process. Ordinance says the existence of a violation, you just issue a citation. It doesn't specify that we have to send one kind letter followed by a second less kind letter and then a citation. So all of those things are just there for the convenience and to respect community values. By reducing that, we're still being generous in our approach, but certainly it's in the spirit of the ordinance, is in the spirit of community values to try to find the least punitive ways of resolving the issues and not to find everything to ding our citizens on.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Great. Gavin, were you going to say something?
No, I think I generally agree with Marianne. I mean, yeah, I think that there's been amazing work done. I don't think there's any question about that. I think there's been strong support for continuing to create safety, on our sidewalks, and the idea of doing, enforcement, particularly given, I think this point you're making about a cultural shift. I mean, I'm just thinking about, I got a citation, and like the way that the conversation went at my house, it's not going to happen that way again. Meaning, like, we had that conversation. I think it'll be something that we pay attention to. I have to imagine other people will be in the same boat.
Yep. Okay. Carmen, anything?
No.
Okay.
I think, I agree with Marianne and what Gavin.
Yep. And I agree with that too. I think we've seen a lot of changes. I think that, Mitzi, we're not going to extend this conversation tonight, but I think we've seen some changes. I've been a big advocate of that, we need to support folks and help them with these problems. We understand that some people are resistant, and what Denise has reported to us, and I think what Josue is saying is we're going to tackle those bigger problems, and we're going to keep working on it. So I think that's enough for tonight. We talk a lot about sidewalks in this meeting and at active transportation, and I'm sure we'll continue to. Okay. I don't have a lot to say about the next item, the joint meeting. I suggested an agenda which the other bodies have seen and I think are comfortable with. And it kind of relates to my memo of sort of like what ongoing topics might look like. If I did not include utilities, then we want to talk both about reciprocal tax and utilities. I can't remember.
You did.
Did I? Okay. And otherwise, whoever could make it on the 7th. I know we've got, we definitely have folks from the township and from the school board that'll be attending, and that meeting will be here in council chambers. So we'll kind of rotate around because I expect there'll be a third meeting as well. I mean, I think it's a good quarterly thing for the taxing bodies to do. So any questions or comments on that? All right. So let's go ahead and move into new business. And Josue, you want to talk about the personnel manual changes?
Yeah, so this is, we'll tackle it with Amy and I, with two of us. So there's a memo from Amy on the proposed language to resolve the OCRC settlement on the anti-discrimination. I want to let you guys know that I took the training, the anti-discrimination training. It's been recorded. We're going to get it out, and we submitted our compliance document to OCRC. So we're good in that end. This is what's left to resolve, or one of the
It's probably
items.
always good to remind folks, since they don't continually watch our meetings, that the reason that this training needed to be done was not because of anything that Josue did.
Yes.
It was not during his time as village manager, but it was a requirement. So
Thank you, Brian. I appreciate that. That way our viewers don't get the idea that I'm being sent to anti-discrimination training. The language there,
Not look at that as a negative.
I'm getting all the training that there is to.
It's positive.
Yep.
Yes, it's positive. So during that process, as we're proposing language, council wanted to understand other liabilities that we have through our personnel policies. One of the issues that have been a financial liability for the village is this unlimited sick leave coming in and being paid out. So we researched the models that are out there. The OCRC is a bit different from what we have in the sense that it caps what gets paid out. There's two approaches to limiting those liabilities. One is what OCRC allows, or what is their standard practice, their common practice. And there are other communities that are capping the number of sick hours that are coming in. Amy, is there anything else you want to?
Did you guys get the draft at your desk?
yes.
I was just about to ask you this. For the second time tonight, I'm telling you that the thing that's in your packet has changed since the time it was put in your packet. Johnny had a chance to look at it, and we had some conversations about his input, which is what led to the red lines that Judy prepared today to the language that I proposed. So like Josue said, you do have the right under Ohio law to cap the amount of sick leave that a new hire can bring in from their employment with another qualifying public entity in the state of Ohio. So they may have worked there for 20 years, and they may have banked tons and tons of hours. And so capping what they can transfer into the village then caps what the village would be paying out to them upon their either resignation or retirement. So the point that Johnny had made with the language that you had prior to tonight was that we want to be able to maybe pay out more of those hours if someone has more of a tenure here. If someone is with the village, the way it's drafted right now, for 10 years or more, then maybe then you could consider writing your personnel manual in such a way that then they would be entitled to have more of a payout upon their retirement or resignation than if they would only here for, less than 10 years. So when I went through a bunch of personnel manuals for a lot of other communities, and I put a little footnote on this memo. I saw a lot of 240 hours and 480 hours as common amounts that showed up in other communities. I think that maybe some people think that number is a little low and it should be a little bit higher. That's really at your discretion, that you can, and maybe to even consider how that would work with from a hours perspective, and how many days that would equal and things like that. So I'm happy to answer any questions that you have, but this is the suggestion.
Well, and I appreciate it also gives some flexibility, which is kind of related to the decision that we made at the last meeting. I think the main thing is we've got to monitor this. And so, so we need to be aware of what we're getting into with these contracts. Gavin?
This would be for all employees.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
With the exception for council, if you brought someone in as a contract employee, yes, this does spell out that exception.
Right.
So I'm sorry, can you just repeat the part about, so if somebody's here for 10 years, or I thought this was just addressing
So
what
we
they could
added,
bring
we
in,
added
but-
this red line today. So, okay, let's make an employee, a fictional employee the village is getting ready to hire, and they work for another city in Ohio. And they've banked 1,000 hours of sick leave. So let's say you choose 480 hours, the amount of sick leave that they can transfer into the village. So they come to the village, they have their 1,000 hours, their city signs off, yes, they have these 1,000 hours, they can transfer them in, but you've capped it. So they're only going to bring in their 480. What we were toying with earlier was the village does not want to be on the hook to pay out those hours if that employee immediately resigns. But if they stick around a while, then maybe it makes sense to bake it into the policy that they get paid out for the full hours that they transferred in. Does that help?
Yeah, okay.
Yep, I think that makes a lot of sense. Okay. Any other questions? All right. Thanks, Amy. Thanks, Josue. Okay. Investment policy. One of the things that I noticed when we updated our treasurer ordinance is that we are supposed to review our investment policy annually. So that's why it's in the packet for us to have reviewed and approve. So does anyone have any questions, comments, concerns about that investment policy? Yes.
I don't personally feel qualified to know about this. So I read it and I was just like, is there some third-party consumer finance protection bureau entity that, so if this is like a best practice, it all sounds okay. I don't know about whether that is good or not.
So council went through a lengthy process, as did the prior investment committee that Lisa was a part of. We reviewed it carefully. I think it's solid. Again, we can always look at it again, but I want to make sure we're at least meeting the requirement of our ordinance. So I don't think we have any concerns.
No, and from the design perspective, it has to meet state guidelines, the preservation of capital, what concentration risk you can have, so commercial paper versus bonds and CDs. So there are these strict guidelines that we have to follow from the state. Judy takes trainings that specify how what that concentration risk is for investments. And so our policy has to meet some standard, it has to meet the state standard. And our policy does. There is some flexibility for the village to prioritize certain investments. So let's say that you wanted to prioritize state-issued bonds. We looked at one bond that was offered by Greene County, and our advisor said, that's great, but you can get this other thing that pays better and still as safe.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I think the upshot is there's not a whole lot of flexibility we have as a local or a government entity. So
you're okay taking, the only change here was I whacked out all the Star Plus references because there is no Star Plus.
right.
So,
Yep. And that was definitely one of the things. And I know we fixed the, consistency around finance committee or whatever in there. So any other questions? So let's go ahead and I guess I'll ask for a motion to approve the investment policy.
I move that we approve the investment policy.
Second.
Okay, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Yeah, speaking to the mic. Okay, and so our last new business item is the proposal to improve communications and have more efficient meetings, which always sounds good.
Yes.
Carmen?
Yes. So I wanted to bring this to council and to everybody kind of in light of recent developments around some EC projects and also PACC. I think that one of the things that could really benefit transparency, to make sure that we're all on the same page, to make sure that we're communicating efficiently between boards and commissions, staff and council, is that we have staff, specifically village manager, attending EC meetings, PACC meetings, all, the meetings that that village manager doesn't regularly attend, on maybe a monthly basis or a quarterly basis, or at the request of those chairpersons, the people that are the chairs of board commission. And I think this is one of the ways that we can work together to alleviate miscommunications or faulty communications or lack of communications, or to improve efficiency and transparency so everyone can be on the same page.
Yep. And, we talked about this, and I appreciate the proposal. My first thought is I think council liaisons would be judicious about this. And so, I think quarterly probably, makes sense if necessary, right?
Quarterly if necessary, and if it's, if there aren't any special projects happening, or then not.
Right, right. And I think this is also along the lines of why we're going to talk about, we've got the committee on committees, because I think that's going to be another route where, a non-majority of council members can vet things and then bring those forward. So I think it makes sense. This way, I think you are also open to the idea.
Yes, to the quarterly meetings.
Okay.
And if not quarterly, it might not, I guess what I'm saying is it may not even be necessary to be quarterly.
Yeah.
Okay.
Quarterly, the PACC meeting, there hasn't been a purpose for us to go there. There were some projects, but we would redirect it administratively depending on what it was. But there wasn't a standing PACC meeting that we were attending.
Sure, but and that's okay, but I don't.
Yep. So that's a new one. So that's if I'm being asked to attend, a quarterly meeting for EC and PAC, it could be up to 8 more evening meetings.
Right, but again, if necessary, right?
Quarterly if necessary, that's it.
Mm-hmm.
So quarterly if necessary, and Environmental Commission and PACC.
Okay.
All right, so to that end, I'm going to move that village manager attend, board and commission meetings, specifically EC and PACC, on a quarterly basis.
As needed.
As needed, because it might not even be quarterly.
Okay. And I'll second that. Okay.
Can I say
Yes.
something? So sometimes it might make sense for the village manager to come to a particular meeting because of issues that are being discussed. Might not necessarily be on a quarterly basis. It seems like having some flexibility would be helpful. Also, there are other ways to communicate probably than just coming to meetings, but to have that channel of communication open.
So I guess my kind of argument for the quarterly basis is that, we are working on things in, this, for example, the Ellis Pond thing has been a thing since the summer. So if there would have been a meeting attended at that point, so we don't just work on stuff and it's done in a month, right? So if village manager were to attend meetings on a quarterly basis, he's gonna hit something, he's gonna hit one of those meetings. Because I think that at the request of I just don't think it's necessary, more necessary than quarterly. If quarterly.
Okay. Kevin?
I wonder if we need to also focus on, and Brian, you alluded to it, the council liaisons to the commissions. I'm wondering if we need to consider if we need to sort of up the ante, if you will, for what council liaisons are responsible for, so that the problem that we're trying to solve can get solved without Josue having to add, 8 extra evening meetings over the year. So I don't know, excuse me, what that is, but I think we should ask the question, can council liaisons help close that gap without requiring this extra responsibility in terms of sharing information?
Well, how about this? I think Josue is open to attending those meetings. Mm-hmm. It seems like a good idea. Let's try it out and see how it goes.
Okay.
Is that good? Okay. And we've got some other things that we're working on as well.
And is that a motion on the floor?
Yep. Okay. So I support it. Kevin?
Yep.
Gavin?
Sure.
Marianne?
Yeah.
Okay.
The most informal.
Great.
Yep,
Well, I mean, because also, I don't think it has to be formal, right? We're just talking about ways to communicate better.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
And if we can spend less time talking about a topic over and over again at council table, I would love that. Okay. So now we are, any boards and commissions updates? All right. So I guess I'm going to pass it to Marianne as to, I think Rebecca wanted to say something, or Carmen. Okay. So do you guys want to tee that up, or yeah?
Thank you for addressing the issue, Carmen, with regards to communication. And I find this a great step forward with the quarterly meetings. I'm here mainly because of the EC has done a lot, and it's in the report, but just a recap. Very briefly, for you to look forward in the future, we'll bring a no idling policy, hopefully, to council. We are continuing to work with habitat teams to increase the natural habitat in Yellow Springs. We're also looking at a revision to our pest management policy, and then to address specifically the Ellis Pond issue, where we've seen a lot of progress. But as Carmen mentioned, it's been a long time since we've been working on this. It's for that reason, and I think this is something that has prefaced or underscores the interest for the two liaisons to the EC to bring up the issue of improved communication. Mainly, I wanted to address Josue, a matter of concern, and that is that in working with the community partners on this, particularly Xylem, YSI, and the experts that have been involved from Wright State, Central State, et cetera, the organizers of a meeting to bring those people together were excluded from a meeting last week, namely Carmen and Marianne. This has caused concern for me as chair of the EC. So I wanted to bring it to your attention and to just really underscore that an active exclusion of council members is not the way to build these partnerships, and kind of shocking. So I wanted to bring that forward, and of course ask Marianne or Carmen if they wish to add to that situation.
Well, I agree, and I found it very upsetting, but I don't have anything else to say at this point.
Well, I would like to make a comment on it. I have been publicly criticized for the conditions of or lack of progress on Ellis Pond, and I think it's been an inaccurate representation of the effort that we put into Ellis Pond. We've been working on Ellis Pond for over 2 years, and we looked at all the low impact ways of doing the project, and I think we're reaching this point where we're being criticized for work that we no longer own. EC came to council for authorization to put a plan together. It's been, I don't know, 3-4 months since that happened. The administration's plan to have progress on Ellis Pond was halted. We haven't seen a plan come from Environmental Commission on how to address the pond. We've seen a list of 10 recommendations, but there isn't a plan. So if I and my administration is going to continue to be criticized for work that we don't own, that we do not, the project sponsored, we have to find a way to integrate ourselves to take a leadership position to figure out what's going on with the community partners. I'm glad I was able to have a kind of conversation with Asylum, because we learned that things that were shared at the council meeting were not in fact how they had planned to proceed. So I found it very necessary for me to do that. I find it necessary that I play a greater role in figuring out how things are going to move forward if I'm expected to deliver on this project. And it is the administration's responsibility to deliver on this project. We are the administration. We are the folks that are on the ground working on these projects. We cannot just hand them over to someone to be a steward of public assets.
For that, the EC, I think, would absolutely agree. That's why it's important to continue to have open communication between the village management and the EC and village council. I believe that if you looked at those recommendations, they do form a plan. The EC is not empowered to plan for the village. Recommendations is pretty much all we can do, which we did in August. The important issue here, though, is that when council members reach out to community partners and set up a meeting and ask for a follow-up meeting, that they are included in that follow-up meeting when the village manager organizes it. And I believe that Councilwoman McQueen reached out to you to organize that meeting, and then when requested to attend it, she was not included. So I believe that moving forward, and let's look forward, it is imperative that the EC and village council liaisons are included in further conversation with Ellis Pond. But we are very, very happy that the village is working towards a solution.
And I understood that was my meeting to organize and take, and I took that as my meeting.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. I would just want to add something, Rebecca, not about the meeting, but about idling and whatnot. You're all going to make some proposals. And Patricia Brown just advised, all idling is not created equal. And also it's an old number, but it used to be 2 minutes. And that is, where's the break-even point of idling versus shutting the car off and starting it up again? So I'd like, if you all could, do some research and find out, science, use science and figure out, what is that number? And that's important. If I have a standard gas combustion engine, the old number was, if I'm going to be idling for fewer than 20 minutes, it's better to turn the car off and then turn it back on. But those numbers have changed because so much else has changed. So if you could make sure y'all include those considerations, I'd appreciate it.
Yes, we hope to have a full report and make, again, a recommendation to you all to see what kind of policy would be the best. I'm not an expert on it myself, and Riley is the one who's moving this forward. He's very excited about it. And yes, it would also include input from Josue and come to our meeting to talk about this as well.
Yep. All right. Thanks, Rebecca. And as you're sitting down, the other thing is, as we're thinking about dredging, somebody mentioned to me that, and I talked to Josue about it already, that the soil that you dredge out can be very valuable and help pay for that project. So something to think about, but not to discuss tonight.
I do have one question for you, Brian.
Yes.
It was my understanding, no lengthy conversation, that you were requesting the village manager to work with the Environmental Commission on Ellis Pond. Am I correct?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yes. And thanks for clarifying that. And yep, I think we're getting on the same page. All right. Future agenda items.
So, is this the appropriate time, just a friendly reminder, we've got the work session coming up on public safety philosophy. Just, encourage folks, we've already sent out an agenda. If you've got anything that you're really hoping that we discuss that's not listed there, or anything that we think needs to be included, please let me know. One of the things that I've been thinking about is how and whether and the way to include public comment in these conversations going forward. I think for this meeting, there won't be any, but going forward, there would be. That said, if people in the public have comments or have things they'd like to be considered, please feel free to reach out to me, or Judy, I suppose. I don't know. You could talk to any.
Do it really, really fast, because I've just put that in the paper.
Okay.
The agenda's going in the paper, but if you get changes to me by, 5, okay, so let's say 3 o'clock.
And let's just say, we can leave the agenda the way it is. I'm mostly just saying there is some openness to give feedback and to communicate, and in the future, we're gonna have more of these, so just letting folks know.
Thanks, Gavin. Anything else? Carmen?
I see that Jessica.
Just on behalf of the paper, news.
Yes.
Would be ideal.
We won't do any changes. I'm mostly just saying, hey, this is a process that's begun. Let us know if you have feedback.
Cool. Anything else? All right. I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
I move.
Second.
Okay. All those in favor signify by saying aye.